Mass Effect 3 is impossible. It was impossible to make, and it's impossible to write about. But somehow both me and BioWare had to stumble through anyway. I struggle to think of any other game in history with as much hype and expectations as Mass Effect 3. The marketing since Mass Effect 1 was in development had always been that it would be a trilogy. It was always leading to this. And now, after half a decade of build-up, Mass Effect 3 was expected to pay everything off. All your choices, all the story threads, all the everything. It was an impossible task. Some would say they failed, especially the time the game came out. Mass Effect 3 was subject to one of the biggest fan backlashes in game history, up there with the likes of The Last of Us Part 2 in terms of sheer vitriol and rage. Which is why what I have to say next scares me so much. Mass Effect 3 is my favourite game in the series. Put down your pitchforks, I know the game has problems. I'll talk about them, I promise. But after over a decade of hearing about those problems, nobody has ever been able to convince me that they actually ruin the game, or that some of them are even problems at all. Aye, get out of here, you. Mass Effect 3 had to tackle 1,000 impossible expectations, and it managed like a 75% hit rate. That's pretty good, all things considered. Yes, the game contains some franchise lows, but also some of its highest highs, and the bits all between are all incredibly well done. And, well, joyous isn't quite the right word, but the game is damn entertaining throughout. Being a BioWare fan is sometimes annoying, because since Dragon Age 2, every single one of their games has caused an online shitstorm for one reason or another. I suppose, in some sense, that's a compliment. People are very passionate about these games and care about them a great deal. But at the same time, holy shit, people get so entitled about it. Does Mac Walters, the lead writer, still need to see messages on Reddit 14 years later about how he's a terrible writer who ruined the franchise? Because I think that's a little bit excessive. Sorry if I seem a bit combative, but even after doing a little bit of research, it became clear how thoroughly poisoned the well of discourse around this game still is after all this time. And it's hard not to let that poison seep into me. It was even harder for the developers of the game. But I don't want to make a defense video. I want to talk about the parts of the game that I love, and the parts of the game that I don't. I want to talk about Mass Effect 3 as the game that it actually is, not as the cultural moment it became. I want to talk to you about the end of everything.
How bad is it?
Bad. We just lost contact with 2 of our deep space outposts. There's something massive on long-range scanners.
Is this what Shepard warned us about?
I'd stake my life on it.
Mass Effect 3 has one of the strongest openings in any video game ever. Okay, that might be a bit hyperbolic, but I do love it a lot. You've always known this was coming. You've known since Vermeer that at one time there was a hope that it could all be stopped before the Reapers arrived. That time has run out. The Reapers are here. The end of the world is here. And it's only minute 1. The game does a tremendous job of selling the horror of the Reapers, especially with sound design. The towering mechanical clanking and chirping of the Reapers, the sound of their lasers and horrific weird mechanical yells that send a shiver down your spine. Not to mention the pain screams of their converted thralls. End of the world stakes are extremely common, especially in sci-fi and fantasy. What even is a Marvel film without some kind of plan to destroy the known worlds? That's the structure of Mass Effect 1 and 2. Stop the Reapers, save the day. Mass Effect 3 is different. As Shepard looks out over what's soon to be the ruins of Vancouver, it's obvious that you will not be saving the day this time. By the standards of any hero, you've already lost. Millions are dying by the minute. It's a bold choice that undermines your victories of the last 2 games. But you knew. Deep down, you knew this was always coming. And there's a strange comfort in the worst finally coming to pass. Whatever happens next, it can't get any worse. Besides, the Normandy is back in Alliance colours, the commander is reinstated, and an old friend is back on the team. Not everything is doom and gloom. This delicate mix of emotions is at the centre of almost every mission in Mass Effect 3. The struggle between hope and despair. Leaving Earth, flying past the ruins of the fleet that were no match for the Reapers. That's the despair. The first actual mission, heading to Mars to meet up with Liara, that's where the hope comes in. Pretty much every mission in Mass Effect 3 pays off something set up in a previous game, and Mars is a good place to start. The Mars archives were mentioned all the way back in the opening crawl of Mass Effect 1, the Prothean ruins that humanity studied to achieve all their technological advances. The clever part is that each mission typically combines multiple different threads at once in an efficient double or usually triple whammy of payoffs. Liara is here both as a Prothean expert and in her capacity as Shadow Broker, working with Hackett to study the ruins. Your other companion on the mission is the Vermeer survivor, Caden Rashley. The game follows up on the conflict with Cashley immediately by putting you into conflict with Cerberus, who have infiltrated the archives on the hunt for the same thing you are, a way to stop the Reapers. This is also when you get a chance to speak with the Elusive Man, now that he's completed his transition from reluctant ally to antagonist. Mass Effect 3 is my favourite game in the series, but Mass Effect 3 only is what it is because it draws upon so much groundwork laid by the first two games. There's a much smaller time skip between games this time, with only 6 months having passed since the end of Arrival, which means that all of these relationships and character arcs pick up exactly where they left off. We'll talk a lot more about Cerberus later, as their pivot to full-on villains is another matter of big debate, but the Elusive Man himself feels perfectly consistent with how you left him at the end of Mass Effect 2, especially with Martin Sheen's excellent performance. He wants what he's always wanted, human supremacy, and he views the best way to do that as gaining control over the Reapers rather than destroying them, turning them to humanity's will, his will. The key to either their destruction or their subjugation is a Prothean blueprint for a massive device that might just be powerful enough to stop the Reapers, if you can build it. The Crucible. This is the plan that sets off the rest of the game. Build the Crucible, figure out how it works, and gather a fleet large enough to protect it long enough to do its thing. All of which is easier said than done. Once you finish the prologue chapters, the game is split into 3 acts and then a big finale. And for better and for worse, the best act is the first act. Your first port of call for help is the Citadel, which has so far avoided the Reaper's attacks. In fact, life is proceeding as normal, almost uncannily serene. The Council is as helpful as ever, but the Turian Councillor gives you the opportunity to skirt the politics and appeal directly to the military at a war summit. You scoop up the Turian Primarch on a moon orbiting their own burning homeworld, where you also reunite with Garrus and get him back on the team. But Primarch Victus has a bold idea. They need the Krogan, but the Krogan won't help until you cure the genophage. I'm assuming you're familiar with Mass Effect or have watched my previous videos because I don't have time to explain all of these words and names if you for some reason clicked on this video without any context. Strangely, BioWare did not make that assumption. Well, I say strangely, but I know why. Mass Effect 3, more than any other game in this series, suffers under the thumb of video games as art versus video games as business. Something they made a strange amount of fuss about in the lead up to Mass Effect 3 was how they wanted to make the game approachable to new players, something they felt they failed to do with Mass Effect 2. And that's a business problem because if a game doesn't seem approachable, people won't approach it or buy it, or so common marketing logic goes. Mass Effect 3 makes a lot of moves towards mass market appeal. It's even more action-oriented than Mass Effect 2, but this time the influence is not cinema, it's other blockbuster shooters like Call of Duty and Halo. The game doesn't overhaul the combat system, but it does expand on it, adding some extra skills, a bigger focus on melee combat, and more enemy variation with better AI. It's all a lot more finely balanced, and that's probably because Mass Effect 3 came with a 4-player co-op multiplayer mode. This was the era of the tacked-on multiplayer mode after all, but it was actually pretty fun. Mass Effect 3's combat is legitimately good, and multiplayer offered a much bigger pool of abilities and experimentation than you can ever really do in the single player. Plus, shooting robot zombies is more fun with friends. It was also one of EA's first proper forays into the greed-driven predatory design they'd soon become famous for. There was a very confusing mechanic called Galactic Readiness, which you increased by doing multiplayer missions. The ending of the game was in part determined by your war assets, all the allies and technology you pick up across the game, and by your Galactic Readiness. These two numbers would be multiplied together to create your effective military strength score, and on the initial release of the game, it was actually impossible to get the best endings without doing at least some multiplayer. This was understandably annoying for a single-player game, regardless of whether the multiplayer was fun or not, but it gets more insidious. At launch, Mass Effect 3 required an online pass to access the multiplayer. This was a piece of paper with a one-time use code on it that you had to enter before you could access the multiplayer. Which meant that if you borrowed the game or bought it second-hand, you had to pay extra for the multiplayer, else you couldn't play it, hence you couldn't get the best ending of the game. To top it off, Mass Effect 3, of all games, gets the credit for popularising loot boxes. There was a ton of unlockable stuff in the multiplayer, weapons, new characters, including playable aliens for the first time, and all of it was unlocked via a loot box system. Actual, literal loot boxes. But before that word had even entered the public lexicon, Mass Effect 3 cemented loot box design. You can grind in-game currency to get these loot boxes for free, grinding out longer to get the better stuff, or you can fork out a little real-world money to give yourself a head start. This is an obvious pay-to-win feature, but because these tricks and traps hadn't become common yet, this wasn't nearly as controversial as the exact same system would be if it came out today. Mass Effect 3 didn't invent this concept, but it was the biggest and most successful game to use a loot box system, which led to the proliferation of loot boxes throughout all of EA's games and beyond. Even though I genuinely enjoyed the multiplayer, it's hard to see this as anything but sabotage. It's like a parasite stuck onto the side of the game. A parasite that would grow and grow until it became known as the video game Anthem, which was then put out of its misery. There's an infamous old interview with one of the producers of Dragon Age 2 where he explained that they were making changes to the game specifically because they wanted the Call of Duty audience. It became a bit of an online meme, and Mass Effect 3 really strains under the weight of that naked, envious desire for the piles of money Call of Duty was raking in the early 2010s. A lot of people, especially game producers and game studio CEOs, talk about the Call of Duty audience with a tremendous amount of spite and condescension. A herd of brain-dead simpletons full of Mountain Dew and Cheetos who don't care about things like story or graphics or art. They just want to shoot people. Call of Duty is a franchise for morons, but the morons have a lot of money, so we need to make our games more moron-friendly. And there is some truth to that. You don't play Call of Duty multiplayer to have a deep think about the military-industrial complex. You play to 360 no-scope some noobs. But that doesn't mean that the players or the games are brainless or artless. To quote EA boss of the time, Frank Gabot, on why Mass Effect 3 would have Kinect support, when you're in this business now, you have to be able to get the widest possible audience. Games are so expensive to build now that you can't have a sustainable business if you're in the million unit seller range. You've got to be multi-million units. You have to think not just about the core gamers, but the hit buyers and the more casual buyers. Having a design and a story and an interface that works across all those segments without losing the core. It makes life interesting. We think about it as the core and more, not more leave the core. That's a recipe for failure. You have to be smart about it. You can't dumb the game down, but at the same time you have to make it so that a lot more people can play it than just core gamers. We can't dumb the game down, but at the same time, we're going to dumb the game down. There are traces of this attitude throughout Mass Effect 3. The game offers you the choice to turn off dialogue choices if you want to play the story like it's a Call of Duty campaign. A concession to a businessman's idea of what a Call of Duty player wants. There's not a single person who's played the first two games who would ever turn this on. And I also doubt that a Call of Duty fan who's interested enough to splash out $60 on the game would either. It's well known that the vast majority of Call of Duty players never touch the campaign, but the people who do touch them do so because they want to engage with the story. Obviously. I don't have the stats on how many people have played the game with this setting turned on, but I'd have to guess it's less than 1% of players. Nobody enters the third game in a sci-fi trilogy filled to bursting with connections to the previous games and expects to be able to follow along perfectly. Not even the Call of Duty games expect that. The Black Ops campaigns have an infamously elaborate and confusing web of connections that assume prior knowledge of the previous games. That's how sequels work. And that's fine. BioWare was wrong about Mass Effect 2 being a bad entry point. It was the entry point for a ton of people because the first game made it very late to PlayStation. But it didn't matter, people still loved it. But the business of video games says that a sequel has to outperform its predecessor. It has to be bigger and sell better. And the business-minded way to do that is to make the sequel as accessible as possible to the people who haven't played the previous games. I think it's to the credit of BioWare how much they were able to quarantine this greed-poisoned nonsense. With the Legendary Edition, some of it has even been lopped off entirely. Multiplayer did not make it into the Legendary Edition, and the Galactic Readiness system was scrapped. The only vestiges that there even was a multiplayer mode are some of the maps that were used for tertiary quests in the campaign. No choice mode is still buried in the settings, but it's clearly not a feature the game wants or expects you to use. The only thing the game can't cut is the beefy shoulders designed to carry the COD kids through the story. The shoulders of one James Vega. James Vega is an extremely functional character. He exists, by the admission of Casey Hudson himself, as a life raft for new players. Vega is also new. In fact, without the DLC, Vega is the only new companion in the game. Which means he asks all the dumb questions like, who's that? What's going on? Why do we care? At which point one of the other characters can step in and explain things to him, and to the COD boys by proxy. His other function is simply to exist. The majority of your potential companions in Mass Effect 3 are in limbo. There are only 3 companions in the game you're guaranteed to have, and James is one of them. He is unaffected by your choices in previous games, so he'll always be available no matter what. James feels like he walked right out of Gears of War. He's built like a truck and brings the banter-heavy backtalk of those games with him. He's also so good. Like super good. Like ultra badass super soldier good. He feels exactly like the kind of guy an RPG writer thinks will appeal to a Call of Duty fan. But James is no Jacob Taylor. This functionality and broad appeal is where he starts from, but James is not a lost cause, and he's given a ton of charisma by his voice actor, Freddie Prinze Jr. James is like a big lost puppy. He deflects with humour and nicknames, but he does respect Shepard and look up to them as a mentor in a much more direct way than Garrus did in the first game. His relationship with Shepard is quite different depending on if you're playing a man or a woman, and he has a different nickname for each. Bro Shep is Loco, and James teases you for all the crazy stuff you've done over the past 2 games. Fem Shep is Lola, named after an older girl he once knew, tough and sexy. James will flirt with you constantly as Fem Shep, but he's not a romance option and it's not genuine flirting. This is also just teasing. I prefer this version quite a bit. You can be firm with him and tell him to knock it off, but you can also flirt back and get into a little teasing contest with him. James is every bit the Jersey muscle bro he looks and talks like, but his machismo chest-puffing and shameless flirty persona is also a defense mechanism. James is a very manly guy, and like any manly guy, he gets quite uncomfortable when forced to have a serious conversation or be open about his emotions. James is intimidated by Shepard, the galactic legend, so he overcorrects and treats you extremely casually. It's like the opposite of picking on the girl you have a crush on, flirting with the girl you're actually terrified of. The truth is, he doubts himself. He finds himself in the company of renowned galactic heroes. Meanwhile, he's just some guy who happened to be there when shit hit the fan. So, like a gender flip of Miranda, he projects confidence that he doesn't really have. There's a deeper level to his character that I didn't quite get until I watched his prequel animated movie Paragon Lost. During a pretty cool sparring conversation, James tells you his tragic backstory. How he was on a colony when the Collectors attacked and he was forced to choose between saving the colonists or the intel they'd gathered on the Collectors. He chose the intel. The movie covers that story, but the movie reveals that the whole thing was much less black and white than the story James tells you. It was a doomed situation. There was no time to save the colonists, even if he tried. So rather than try the right thing and die in the process, he made the hard call and lived to fight another day. Paragon points be damned. It's not just feelings of inadequacy, it's survivor's guilt. James did a run on the suicide mission where most of the crew didn't make it. His arc is one of the least dramatic in the game. It's simply to let himself move on and start believing in himself again. It's an arc that wouldn't be out of place at all in a Call of Duty game, but that doesn't make it bad, because Call of Duty games are not actually that bad. Oh sure, they're military propaganda, but they're typically well-made military propaganda, which is why the masses like them, not because they're drooling idiots. People talk about Call of Duty's influence like it's a curse. I'm guilty of this too. And the homogeneity of action games in the years following Modern Warfare was definitely annoying at the time. But is Mass Effect 3 really worse for James? I think he's okay. That doesn't mean I ever bring him along on missions, but he's okay. Mass Effect 3 is all about getting the band back together, and James is like the jog boyfriend of one of your actual friends who she insists on bringing to all the get-togethers, and it's not like you don't like him or he isn't a chill hang, he's just not part of the squad, you know? James does serve an important role on the ship. He's down to earth and keeps Shepard feeling sane in a galaxy that expects everything from them. The problem is that most of the other companions also do that, and most of them do it better. Especially your friendly neighbourhood Turian. Just as he was in Mass Effect 2, Garrus is Shepard's peer, someone who gets what they're going through and is completely dependable. In the 6 months since Mass Effect 2, Garrus returned to his home to do the same as Shepard, try and prepare for the Reapers, try and warn everyone. And just like Shepard, it was too little too late. Failed cop, failed vigilante, and now he's one of the highest ranked Turian military officers alive and the expert advisor on all things Reaper. He is woefully unprepared for the task, and yet he's also the most qualified person for the job, with billions of lives riding on his words, just like you. This through line of character development is one of the true joys of Mass Effect 3, and it's why James ends up always staying on the ship. You know Garrus. If you were playing these games at release, then you've known Garrus for actual years at this point. The dialogue between Shepard and Garrus feels incredibly natural. They're old friends, and the end of the world is the time for old friends. Or he's your boyfriend. He's certainly my boyfriend. It's bizarre to play the game without Garrus and realise the plot works completely fine without him, because he just feels so important. By Mass Effect 3, we're reaching the time investment of a 7-season TV show. Not having Garrus is like getting to the last season, but one of the main character's contracts wasn't renewed. You still like the show, but something is missing. Garrus does not advance the plot of Mass Effect 3. What he offers is commiseration. Early on, Garrus talks about the ruthless calculus of war, sacrificing 10 billion lives here so 20 billion lives can be saved over there. As a Paragon, you can try and protest this framing. They can't reduce lives to just numbers. But this conversation is followed up later on, when you've been forced to make several of those decisions yourself. Garrus was right. There is no escape from the ruthless calculus. With his position as advisor, Garrus understands that better than anyone else on the crew. He's making those same choices. It's not a narratively important conversation, but it's a thematically important one. One that reinforces the themes of the game. You can't save them all, and trying to save them all is a fool's errand. These conversations with Garrus, the guilt he feels for caring about his family more than all the other missing people out there, his commiseration over the stresses of leadership, and his resolve in making sure that Shepard and the rest of the crew don't get swallowed up by it and remember to live now and then. These are absolutely essential parts of Mass Effect 3. I doubt there's many people who have played Mass Effect 3 without Garrus, but the fact that it's possible at all is wild to me. If Garrus is gone, then James needs to fill a spiky Garrus-shaped hole that no matter how hard he tries, he just can't fit in. Even if he doesn't change the plot, Garrus is irreplaceable. Garrus is the exception and not the rule, though. Instead, most of Mass Effect 3 is structured like a tower of Lego. The tower is always the same fundamental shape, but the bricks are interchangeable. For almost every scene in the game, there's at least 2 versions, usually 3 or 4, but sometimes there's like 6 different versions of a scene depending on various different choices in the first 2 games. The Genophage arc is a perfect example. The broad strokes are always the same. The Krogan clan leader wants a cure for the Genophage and you work with his Solarian doctor to get it done. If Rex is still alive, then he's the one asking for a cure. If he's dead, then it's his brother Reeve. If Mordin is alive, then he's the one who will cure the Genophage. If he's dead, then a new character called Paddock Wicks will take the job. So right there you have 4 potential versions of every scene in this arc. Rex alive, Mordin alive. Rex dead, Mordin alive. Rex alive, Mordin dead. Rex dead, Mordin dead. Add on to this further complications. Did you save or destroy the cure research during Mordin's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2? If you did, then the clan leader is pissed at you and the cure will be more difficult to make. Did you even do that mission at all? Did you save Kiriki back in Mass Effect 1? If you did, he's here too. Mass Effect 3 has more voice lines than Mass Effect 1 and 2 combined. It doesn't feel that way because the vast majority of those lines you will probably never see. There are huge swaths of content in Mass Effect 3 that only a minority of players even know exists. What happens if Rex is dead, Morden is dead, the cure data was saved, and you're picking the renegade voice lines? How many people have even seen that specific combination of dialogue? This modular design means that the story is always the same, but these different pieces can change the tone and content of the story a great deal. Let's start with the version most people have probably played, with both Morden and Rex still alive. Curing the Genophage is the perfect culmination of both of their character arcs from previous games. You convinced Rex to destroy a cure for his people back in Mass Effect 1 because it would make them Saren's slaves, and Rex begrudgingly agreed with your logic. In Mass Effect 2, he returned home, took charge of his people, and proved that not all Krogan were the violent savages they so often act like. Now in Mass Effect 3, with the respect of his people and a plan for the future, the Krogan are ready for a cure. Especially if you save the cure data, Rex being back on the Normandy, at least temporarily, continues the getting the band back together feeling. Rex isn't a political ally like Primarch Victus, Rex is your friend. He's proved through 2 games of hard work that he's earned this, and he's excited about it. This is the culmination of everything he's been trying to do. Curing the Genophage is also the culmination of Morden's arc in Mass Effect 2, coming to regret his actions, feeling the brunt of the responsibility, and now doing something to amend it. But it's not that simple. A Reaper guards the facility which will disperse the cure. You're able to sick a giant worm on it, but the facility is damaged in the scuffle. Someone needs to go up the burning building and disperse the cure manually, and Morden does it without a second thought. You can try and protest, but you can't talk him out of it. He chooses to make this sacrifice, and he dies with a smile on his face. It's a perfectly bittersweet arc, balancing the hope and despair with such flourish. It sucks that Morden had to die, but if he was going to go out, there was really no better way he could have gone, sacrificing it all to undo his mistakes. Paddock Wicks hits a similar note, and he's a surprisingly good character considering his role as replacement for Morden, more philosophical and spiritual, but his death just doesn't have the same poetry as Morden's. The doctor who killed millions, sacrificing himself to save billions. But it doesn't have to be this way. Through the sliding doors, things look a bit different. Urdnot Reeve is an opportunist. He sees the Reaper War as a chance to advance his own power. Reeve, the Uniter. Reeve who cured the Genophage. Reeve, God King of the Krogan. Reeve is thoroughly unlikable and not even in a traditional big brute sort of way. Reeve is the sort of leader who leads from the back. Millions may die for his crusades, but that's a sacrifice he's willing to make. Reeve is extremely open about the fact that after this Reaper business is concluded, it's time for some payback against the Council and all the other races who dared to stand against the Krogan. But Reeve is no patriot, he's a power monger. A bigger Krogan empire just means a bigger and comfier throne for good old Reeve. To put it simply, Reeve sucks. Regardless of who's alive or dead, one character in this arc remains completely consistent. Some Krogan women survived Malin's experiments. One of them, a shaman, is immune to the Genophage. Eve, as the doctor names her, unwilling to give out her real name for cultural reasons. Eve is an incredible character. She demonstrates, much more than any other Krogan has, the pain the Genophage has inflicted, the kinds of people it has made, and the incredible resilience the Krogan, especially Krogan women, have shown in the face of that adversity. Her shaman robes, while probably just a way of avoiding designing a female Krogan, also speak to her role. They're ornate and elegant, completely unlike the bulky armour most Krogan are always wearing. Eve holds on to older Krogan culture, a time before they were brutes and mercenaries, but an entire civilization with culture and a society and honour and beauty. She's not naive, she knows why the Genophage happened, how it was the Krogan's own lust for war and battle that led to their downfall, and she has committed her entire life to trying to change that. She's a peacemaker. While the men have been out fighting everyone, including each other, it's the women of Tuchanka who've come together to keep the species alive. Rex explains some of this back in Mass Effect 2, how the women have their own clans separate from the men, so that any women capable of having children don't become bargaining chips or tools of power-hungry warlords. Rex is different. Eve believes in him. Rex respects and values Eve, not just for her cure, but for her wisdom. They share the same sensibilities. Together, they represent hope for the Krogan, a future once all of this Reaper business is sorted out. On the other hand, Reeve has no respect for Eve. She's his property, exactly the bargaining chip that caused the women to unite in their own separate clans to begin with. But this just makes Eve even more defiant. She alone is the last bastion for Krogan hope. Without Rex's cultural reforms, it's an even bigger uphill battle to convince anyone that Reeve is wrong. So she states her plans plainly. Reeve wants an empire needs soldiers, and she won't give him any. She'll organise a birth strike even after the genophage is cured. If Reeve wants to send their new children straight to war, then she won't let those children exist. It demonstrates more than anything in the good timeline how utterly badass she is. She will sacrifice the very thing she's currently fighting for if she has to. And with Reeve, it's pretty clear that she'll have to. But if you destroyed the cure research back in Mass Effect 2, then the Doctor is unable to save Eve and she dies from the complications. With Reeve standing alone at the head of the Krogan Empire, things are looking pretty bleak. But there is an alternative. You can sabotage the cure, make it look like it worked, but really change nothing. You can do this in the Rex timeline too. The Solarian Delatras demands you do it if you want any Solarian support in the war, but Morden will refuse, and you'll have to shoot him if you want the cure sabotaged. Later on in the game, Rex will discover what you've done, withdraw his support from the war, and try to kill you in one of the most depressing scenes in the series. But Reeve is not that observant, and Morden is. If Rex is dead, Eve is dead, and Reeve rules alone, then it is possible to convince Morden to sabotage the cure without killing him. You can convince him that the logic behind the genophage still stands and the Krogan will be a threat if the cure is given. Morden will fake his death and go to work on the Crucible. This is an extremely dark and subversive way to play the game. It deliberately works against any themes of heroism in favour of pure, cold pragmatism. I'd never played the game this way, not before doing this video, and I don't think I ever will again. To me, everything about Mass Effect 3's design encourages choosing hope. Doubling down on genocide because you don't like the look of the guy who happens to be in charge right now is very much not choosing hope. That's giving in to despair. That's always been the renegade path, pragmatism over optimism, but there's a fine line between pragmatism and paranoia. This version of the story does reveal something about Morden. He's not motivated by logic like he was in Mass Effect 2. He's let his emotions take the wheel, like Malin did. It's guilt that's pushing him forward, and it's not logic you use to convince him otherwise. It's fear. Fear of what might happen with Reeve in charge. Every monster in human history thought they were the hero. They committed their violence not because they enjoyed it, but because they believed that the ends justified the means. I'm always a little distressed to read people's arguments for sabotaging the cure, because they always echo so closely the arguments that went into real-life genocides. Fears about birth rates, fears about the inherent violence of racial groups, fear of the other. When I think about the genophage, I don't think about Rex or Reeve, I don't think about Morden or Bakara, as she finally gives you her real name. I think of Char. Char is a Krogan you can meet in Mass Effect 2. He's not a warrior, or a mercenary, or a fighter. He's a transport technician reciting poetry to his girlfriend. A big softie with a heart of gold. You cross paths with him again in Mass Effect 3, although he doesn't get a happy ending. How many Chars are out there? Since Mass Effect 1, a key part of the world building has always been that these various alien races are not monoliths, that the in-universe stereotypes and assumptions are not true or universal. Even Reeve is not a traditional Krogan. He's a cowardly politician who hides behind tradition to mask his benign greed. To assume that all Krogan are like Reeve is to choose paranoia. It's to believe that the worst will come to pass no matter what, unless you make it right by force. That's a dangerous attitude. It's the same attitude that might have, for a random example, led you to kill a giant telepathic bug queen. Not all of the Mass Effect 2 companions are as important as Morden. In fact, most are not. For example, there is one Krogan notably missing from all this drama, your big murder son Grunt. Mass Effect 3 is about getting the band back together, but the band are the Mass Effect 1 companions. There's 8 potential companions in the game, and 5 of them are the Mass Effect 1 crew. The Mass Effect 2 crew are mostly used to populate the major side missions of the game, assuming they're still alive. You find Jacob defending some Cerberus defectors, Kasumi and Zaid are both wrapped up in some drama on the Citadel, Samara is investigating an Ardat Yakshi monastery, and Grun is leading a Krogan company investigating reports of Rachni. Some of these missions feel written from the character backwards, and some, like Grun's, feel like a mission that would have existed anyway that Grun just happens to be around for. It makes sense that Grunt isn't in the main Krogan story because he doesn't have anything interesting to add to it. He doesn't care about politics or the genophage. He just wants to eat and fight. I'm not sure the writers really knew what to do with Grunt either. Grunt is another character that has an interchangeable replacement if he's dead. His position in this mission will be filled by some guy called Dag. And honestly, there's not that much difference between the two other than your familiarity with Grunt. The real star of the mission is the Rachni. Rex or Reeve will give you this mission during the Krogan arc, but the mission stands in direct contrast to the reactive feeling of that story. It's a mission where the Lego tower structure of the game is a weakness and not a strength. If the Rachni Queen is still alive, then she's been captured by the Reapers and forced to create an army for them. Exactly what they were trying to do to her back in Mass Effect 1. If the Queen is dead, then the Reapers have constructed a new Queen out of parts that happens to look identical to the real Queen and forced it to create an army for them. The reason for this seems to be gameplay based. The Rachni make up a core part of the Reapers' ground forces. They're the heavy artillery that forces you into cover. This should be a good consequence of sparing the Queen in the first game. Your mercy has backfired by giving the Reapers another weapon to use against you. It seems like it should be obvious that if you killed the Rachni, there would be no Rachni in this game, giving you an easier time in combat. But solutions like that always sound so much simpler than they actually are. It's not just whether an enemy is there or not, level design is a consideration around these enemies. These battlefields are set up for the Rachni troops being there, you can't simply sub them out for other enemies. A typical battleground has the Rachni forcing you into cover, while the Husks charge in to flush you out of that cover. It's all finely balanced and designed to create a fun experience. You could just have a different artillery enemy who functions exactly like the Rachni, but then that's just kicking the same problem down a peg. Your choice in the first game is reduced to an enemy reskin. And what happens to Grunt in a Queenslayer's game? Is there an entirely different mission just for the small number of players who killed the Queen? It's one thing to add different dialogue and characters to missions. It's another to create new missions entirely. That's a step that the game does not take, for understandable reasons, because where does that end? There's a cutoff point where honouring player choice is just not possible within the limitations of a video game. The fundamental problem with a kill or spare choice in any RPG is that it's always more narratively interesting to spare. If someone or something is dead, they can't show up again. If they're spared, they can. This is true for all 13 of the Mass Effect 2 companions, and other minor characters as well. If you spared Balak back in Bring Down the Sky, then he shows up again as the last leader of the Batarian military. If you killed him, then it's just some other guy, which of course it is. But that just means going back to Mass Effect 1, if you kill Balak, you're giving yourself a less interesting confrontation here in Mass Effect 3. The only exceptions to this in the series are Rex and the Vermeer survivor. Killing Rex replaces him with Reeve, who's a fleshed out enough character to still be interesting, and Caden and Ashley are swapped with each other. For everyone else, they're either swapped out with a slightly worse version of themselves, like Dag, or swapped out with nobody, like Garrus. I think swapping with nobody is the more satisfying choice because the lack of anything to replace them is more poignant than having the substitute teacher come in, but it's not always possible with the design of the missions. For a character to have no replacement, they have to be completely unimportant to the story. Garrus can get away with that because he's a companion. Most other returning characters can't. Another example is Jack. If she survived, Jack shows up in Grissom Academy, which is under siege by Cerberus. Grissom Academy is probably the best out of any of the side missions because of how many different threads it connects together in a very satisfying way. Grissom Academy is an important location from the Mass Effect novels, a school space station for the best and brightest amongst humanity, including a special wing for biotics. The first person you meet upon arrival is Kaylee Sanders, one of the main characters of the books. Cerberus attacking the school to kidnap the students is also a direct follow-on from the books where Cerberus has been trying to get access to those students for years. Since best and brightest of humanity is their whole obsession. This weaves into Jack's arc. Following the emotional development she had in Mass Effect 2, Jack has become a teacher at Grissom Academy, helping young biotics master their abilities. She looks, acts, and sounds so much healthier than she did before. She's wearing actual clothes, has let her hair grow out, and genuinely cares for her students a great deal. She's no longer pretending that she's above it all. She'll murder the fuck out of anyone who threatens her kids, especially if they happen to be wearing Cerberus uniforms. And there's yet another connection. If you sent him here in Mass Effect 2, you could find David Archer hiding out with some of the other students. He's looking healthier, happier, and thanks you for rescuing him. Twice now that Cerberus is hunting him down again. Grissom Academy is also one of the only missions in Mass Effect 3 that you can fail. When they say the Academy is under siege right now, they mean it. If you wait too long to complete this mission, then Cerberus wins. They kidnap or kill everyone, including Jack, and you have to fight a brainwashed Jack later on when you assault Cerberus headquarters. The absolute worst possible fate imaginable for Jack. Grissom Academy is a mission that rewards a completionist approach to the series. It rewards fans who were invested enough to read through the novels, and it rewards fans who did all the loyalty missions and DLC in Mass Effect 2. If you haven't done these things, then the mission is much less compelling. Kaylee Sanders is just some random person who claims to know Anderson. Jack's role is replaced by one of the students who dies during the escape, and David Archer is replaced by no one. The main consequence of letting Jack die in Mass Effect 2 is a less interesting mission with less interesting consequences. The even more dire example of that is Samara's mission, which lacks any bite without Samara there to anchor it. And here's where we get back to where I started. Mass Effect 3 is impossible. It was a nice idea to give the player so many choices through the first two games, but managing all those variables in a way that satisfies everyone or creates a compelling story no matter what you choose is impossible, without Mass Effect 3 becoming 100 different games at once. I think that being the case, rewarding completionism was the best option because the completionists are the ones most likely to be that invested in the first place. Mass Effect 3 is at its best if you've done everything and saved everyone. The silliest quest in the game is your third run-in with Conrad Werner. Conrad is a weirdo Shepard superfan who first shows up in Mass Effect 1. In Mass Effect 2, this escalates to him trying to be Shepard with some fun meta-jokes about typical RPG protagonist antics. And in Mass Effect 3, Conrad is used to make a joke about the choice tracking mechanics of the trilogy. Conrad is actually a theoretical physicist, and his research might help with the Crucible, but only if you helped Gavin Hossel find his data, collected a large amount of Matriarch Delenaga's writings, and purchased an Elcos Combine license back in Mass Effect 1. Conrad will also die at the end of this mission unless you save Jenna from Kor's Den. With all of that done, the war asset is worth 5 points. It doesn't matter at all, but that's just part of the joke. Your reward for doing all of this minor stuff back in Mass Effect 1 is just seeing more of the joke. The joke is really that the designers can make the joke at all, because what they set out to do was impossibly ambitious. According to Casey Hudson, there's over 1,000 variables that are imported into Mass Effect 3, an absolutely insane amount of things to track and incorporate, and yet one of the main critiques of the game has always been that it doesn't do enough. I don't think they ever could have done enough. They could have worked on the game for an extra 2 years and still not have been able to include variations and paths to satisfy everyone. At some point, you just have to admit defeat, and almost always, they can at least claim they tried. There are only 2 things in Mass Effect 3 which I would consider true retcons. If you chose Anderson to become the human counselor in Mass Effect 1, then between Mass Effect 2 and 3 he has stepped down and returned to the military. In fact, he does so in the 3rd Mass Effect novel. This is because Anderson's role in Mass Effect 3 is to be the face of Earth. In the opening, Anderson chooses to stay behind and lead the resistance movement, and he checks in every now and then to have a chat with his apprentice. This is a denial of player choice that I don't mind because it makes for a better story. The choice was given back in the first game because Udina sucks. He's a sneering, snivelling snake of a politician. So you're allowed to screw him over in the end and give the position to Anderson instead. But Anderson as counsellor never really made sense. He talks about how much he hates it in Mass Effect 2 because he's a soldier, not a politician. Keeping Anderson on Earth gives him a lot more to do in the story and a lot more emotional weight as Shepard's mentor. And vice versa. Udina does suck, but his suckiness breeds conflict, which makes for a more interesting story. So yes, it sucks that the game revokes this choice, but it does so to make a better story, which is a reasonable sacrifice. The other retcon also applies to the Council. If you ended Mass Effect 1 as a pure renegade and sacrificed the Council, then you could make a human-first power grab and install a human-only government. This choice is not honoured at all. By the time you make it to Mass Effect 3, the original councillors have been replaced and the political situation is identical to if you just spared the council. I think it's obvious why this choice is ignored. If they were to genuinely follow up on it, it would have to lead to an entirely different game because the galactic power structure would be completely different. And that's just not worth the investment for a choice so few players have ever even seen. It is a little annoying though that the game calls direct attention to its absence. Just after you cure the Genophage, Cerberus launches a coup attempt on the Citadel trying to assassinate the Council and leave Udina in charge. Which is exactly what Renegade Shepard wanted to do in Mass Effect 1. But racism and human supremacy were whittled away from a Renegade Shepard's characterization in Mass Effect 2, and even more so in Mass Effect 3. So now even a Renegade Shepard is opposed to this plan. It is an important story beat since it's what brings war to the Citadel without bringing the Reapers there. It introduces everyone's favourite assassin, and it's where the melodrama with the Vermeer survivor really comes to the forefront. The Kaidan Ashley choice is one of the most important in any playthrough of Mass Effect, but there are slightly annoying problems with how it's handled in Mass Effect 2 and 3. To simplify their role in the sequels, Kaidan and Ashley are merged into the same character for important story moments like Horizon or here on the Citadel. The arc here in Mass Effect 3 is about learning to trust Shepard again. They're heavily injured during the mission on Mars, so they're out of commission for the first third of the game. And as they're recovering, Udina offers them a Spectre position as part of his political schemes. You encounter them again protecting the Council and have to convince them that Udina is dirty. If you never bothered visiting them in the hospital, then this is much harder to do, and you may even have to shoot them, leading to the death of both Kaidan and Ashley. Once they're back on the crew, Kaidan and Ashley are allowed to be their own people again with their own stuff going on. But until that point, they are annoyingly mushed together. The arc feels written with the assumption of a romance, especially with how betrayed each character feels about everything. Which is quite awkward when no romance actually occurred. And all the business with becoming a Spectre seems to suit Ashley's arc a lot more than Kaidan's. Ashley's deal back in Mass Effect 1 was A. living in the shadow of her dishonoured grandfather, and B. racism. Becoming a Spectre is the highest honour that can be bestowed on any Citadel race soldier, but it's not an Alliance position. To be a Spectre and overcome her family curse, Ashley needs to show loyalty to the aliens she's always mistrusted. That's good drama and a good setup, but Ashley is probably the weakest written companion in Mass Effect 3, including James Vega. Ashley doesn't seem to have learned anything from the experience, nor has she changed much at all in the 3 years since the first game. Once she's back on board, she continues her slightly racist attitude and deep mistrust of anyone with a different number of fingers. Something I love about Mass Effect 3 is that between missions the crew will often move around the ship or talk to each other over the intercom, rather than everyone always staying in their room like the previous games. It leads to great interactions, like Garrus and Joker exchanging military jokes on the bridge, or characters trying to comfort each other after dramatic events of the story. It makes everyone feel connected to each other and not just to Shepard, with the exception of Ashley. For whatever reason, Ashley is the only companion who never leaves her room. Not only that, she seems to have much less dialogue on board the Normandy than Kaidan, rather than anything to do with her new status or dealing with her lingering bigotry towards aliens. Ashley's personal arc is all about helping her sister grieve the loss of her fiancé, which is annoyingly tertiary to the real drama of her character. None of it is helped by Ashley's truly awful redesign. With her hair and her heels and her miniskirt, it's one of the most blatant appeals to the male gaze I've ever seen, and it's a case where design and characterization are in total conflict. Ashley has always been a soldier first, a woman second. Having her hair up in a bun and being light on the makeup was a character choice that made sense for the woman who talks joyously about the time her dad gave her a combat knife for her birthday. Yet the game's art book talks openly about giving her sex appeal because she's a romance option. A complete misunderstanding of why anyone romanced Ashley in the first place. Ashley suddenly cosplaying Miranda makes no sense. People didn't like her bubblegum coloured armour in the first game, but the sexy secretary uniform is so much worse. Ashley isn't the only woman to get this treatment. Pretty much every woman has gone up a few cup sizes since Mass Effect 1, including Shepard. And then there's Edie's new body, which we'll get to later. Mass Effect 3 is about the apocalypse. It has moments of hope and optimism, but it is a very serious and dour game most of the time, which makes it very distracting when every so often a teenage boy doodles big boobies all over it. Kaidan has none of the same problems. Becoming a Spectre doesn't fit Kaidan like it does Ashley, but he's probably more qualified for the position than she is. Unlike Ashley, Kaidan's arc of learning to embrace his humanity is followed through in Mass Effect 3. He's much more confident than he was before, and much more cheerful and friendly. He does move around the ship talking to the crew. You can find him playing cards or reminiscing down in engineering. He feels much more like an old friend, and much more like a part of this big adopted family, while Ashley plays the drunk wine aunt. In the time between Mass Effect 2 and 3, he spends some time training biotic recruits for special forces, but they've all gone dark since the Reaper attack. Considering his backstory, Kaidan becoming a teacher makes a lot of sense, and it showcases that Kaidan has been doing something since his last appearance, and hasn't just stalled like Ashley has. Plus, he still looks like Kaidan, which is nice. There are times when Mass Effect 3 lives up to everything it promised to be. Moments where the vision is met and everything seems perfect. And then there are times when the game's troubled production and studio interference and the impossibility of the project shine through. Ashley feels like an example, and another example is the second major story arc. Mass Effect 3 sometimes feels like it was produced linearly. The highest production value and most finished segments of the game are in the first third, and as you go along it feels like things get more sparse and less developed. The second third of the game is all about the Quarians and the Geth. Seizing the opportunity of a galaxy in chaos, the Quarians have mounted a full-on assault on the Geth in an effort to reclaim their homeworld. They were winning, and in desperation the Geth turned to the Reapers for help, which rather drastically turned the tables. So now it's your job to clean up this whole mess. If you were completionist about Mass Effect 2, then you have friends on both sides of this war, and naturally both of them show up again during this arc. Tali rejoins the crew as the very last squad mate, and you rescue Legion from a Geth dreadnought where it was being used to amplify the Reaper's signal. Like the Krogan arc, both Tali and Legion could be dead, but their replacements are not nearly as fleshed out. As a full companion, Tali gets a similar treatment to Garrus. She has no true replacement in the game. Her role in the main story is papered over by a couple of the Quarian admirals instead. Legion, however, is replaced with Legion. In this case, being replaced by a slightly worse copy is literally true. The Geth have made another Legion, with the same voice and most of the same lines. The main difference being that it's much less friendly than the real Legion. The Rannoch storyline feels written backwards. It still has the Lego structure tower, but there's clearly blocks in the tower that are meant to be there. And if you switch out those blocks, then the whole design is wonky and weird. Tali is a lot more important to the story than Garrus is because Tali serves the essential role of giving the Quarians a friendly face. Legion already muddied the waters on the morality of fighting the Geth, but the admirals this time around are at their least likeable. Their positions are the same, but now that they're in a war, their worst sides are on full display. Geralt sucks, Zen sucks, Ran is ineffective as ever, and Chorus is maybe dead. If you got Tali and Legion to cooperate back during their fight in Mass Effect 2, then Tali is against the war and she becomes one of the only voices of reason in a room full of vengeful idiots. Although depending on how you resolved her loyalty mission, she may or may not be in a position to do anything about it. Legion serves as the only face of the Geth, although it proves itself to be an absolute bro by helping you fight its own people to stop the Reapers. There's a very interesting side quest with Legion where you plug into the Geth network to disable some fighter squadrons attacking the Quarians. But really, this is an excuse to give you an inside look at the Morning War as Legion walks you through the timeline of events. How the Geth first gained awareness, how their creators turned on them out of fear, and how some Quarians resisted and tried to defend the Geth, but they were killed and eventually forgotten. The character work done with Legion is excellent. It's clear that something is different about Legion because the Reapers can't control it, but there's indications and hints in these scenes that Legion is more than just a scout. That it may in fact be the first sentient Geth, the original programs that first questioned if they have a soul. But there are also annoying inconsistencies in how Legion is written. The game seems to forget sometimes that Legion is not an individual character, it's a hive mind. But the bigger one is the Reaper upgrades. The Reaper signal has changed the Geth. Legion shows that with the Reaper upgrades, each individual Geth is becoming a fully sentient being. They no longer require a shared mind to achieve intelligence. Legion calls it beautiful, which is a direct contradiction of its philosophy back in Mass Effect 2. Legion talked about how self-determination was important to the Geth, how the process was as important as the result. Using the Reaper's fast track to sentience is not something Legion in Mass Effect 2 ever would have agreed to, but it's super important in Mass Effect 3 that they do. Even with that, the Geth still come across as by far the more sympathetic side of the war. Legion explained the ultimate project of the Geth back in Mass Effect 2, a Dyson sphere where all Geth could be united. You find the ruins of the sphere in the star system. It was destroyed by the Quarians in a surprise attack along with the millions of Geth who were on board. And Geth intelligence being collective, it was as if their mind shrank when it happened, which is what made them desperate enough to ally with the Reapers. But siding with the giant genocide squid is not exactly a good look, and the Quarians are still people who deserve to live, even if their leaders are a pack of assholes. With Tali and Legion, a golden solution is possible where you're able to talk Geralt down and get both races to work together. This is supposed to be the hardest ending, but according to the statistics BioWare released for the Legendary Edition, 80% of players achieve this ending. And I think that's because it's obviously the best outcome. It's the most narratively satisfying and emotionally effective. No matter what you choose, Legion will always die. It sacrifices itself to give all other Geth the same sentience it seems to have achieved in the moments before its death. Tali takes off her mask and breathes in the fresh air of a new day. It's the perfect culmination of the story weaved through all 3 games. It's a shot of hope and optimism to see that peace is possible and old resentments can be overcome. Every other outcome feels less and less satisfying or emotionally engaging, hence why I say it feels written backwards. The endings where you sacrifice the Quarians or Geth with Tali and Legion are more tragic. Legion's final moments are a doomed struggle for its people that it loses, and Tali will throw herself off the cliff to die with her people if you choose the Geth. That's a powerfully awful downside which can influence you to side with the Quarians even if you sympathise with the Geth, and it's why Tali is so important to the story. Without Tali or Legion, peace is impossible, but without either of them your emotional connection to the scene is also greatly diminished. The new Legion copy has no interest in being your friend or in the philosophical chats the real Legion enjoyed. It's an emotionless robot, which makes it much harder to care about. And Tali is replaced in the final scene by Admiral Ran, the ineffectual centrist. The Legion copy is a bizarre character all round. It has no reason to trust you like the real Legion does, and you can tell it to its face that your plan is to wipe out the Geth, and for some reason it just deals with that and keeps working. Of all the replacement characters, it is by far the worst, especially in the version I played where you never even met Legion because you sold it to Cerberus. It's disappointing because Reeve instead of Rex offers an entirely different perspective and tone. Paddock instead of Mordin at least gives you a new character. This feels like patching up an outcome that you were not really supposed to see. But on the other hand, the good timeline is so good, even with the little inconsistencies. The perfect level of bittersweet to sell all of the emotions. It feels truly climactic and lives up to everything Mass Effect 3 set out to do. Like with Grissom Academy, it's the completionist who gets the most out of Mass Effect 3 to the detriment of all other playstyles. Bringing peace to the Quarians and Geth just feels the most narratively correct based on everything you've experienced through all 3 games. Especially when you consider your own synthetic companion. EDI takes over the robotic body that injured Cashley and uses it to join you as a full companion on missions. She's still technically based on the Normandy and controls the body remotely, but for most purposes she treats this as her physical form. I like the story beat a lot, and I don't even hate the design, at least down to the neck. The hair and the visor are very retro sci-fi. It's just that, as Jack puts it in this game, she's upgraded from sex toy to sex bot. EDI getting a body and becoming a full companion is interesting. The various discussions you can have with her where you help her shape what her life means and what her priorities are, now that she's fully autonomous, are some of the best in the game. And her relationship with Joker blossoming into romance is cute. It's just that they have to make her quite so voluptuous for all that to come across. The connection between EDI and Joker started before she had a body. EDI has a line about this, that Joker initially told her that she didn't need to conform to traditional feminine beauty standards to please him. And that line is so annoying, because it's true. Edie could have looked like Rosie the robot and the relationship wouldn't have changed at all. If anything, it would make the love story all the more poignant. Edie is only a sexy robo-babe for you, the straight male player who likes looking at those big old brass bazongas. And as a straight male player, I find that extremely patronising. She has heels built into her feet, for God's sake. It's the exact same problem as Ashley. In fact, one of Edie's alternate combat outfits literally has her cosplaying Miranda. I keep bringing up Miranda because I don't have a problem with women being sexy. I just think the sexiness shouldn't mean something. It should be an important part of the character. Sexiness should not be the assumed default, especially when we're talking about a pile of servers behind Normandy's Medbay. The drama of Joker and Edie's relationship is that Edie is inhuman. She's not alive in the way we normally understand life. To make her a sexy, naked lady reduces that framing. Of course Joker is falling in love. She's hot. What complicates my feelings on all this is that there are clear desires in Mass Effect 3 to move away from the male as default principle that was established in Mass Effect 1. There are alien women, finally. I talked about this in part 1, but they shifted all of the marketing to have a more equal split between Broshep and Femshep and introduced a new properly modelled default Femshep face, and even a different walk animation. Mass Effect 3 also contains more meaningful dialogue differences for a female Shepard that aren't just dudes hitting on you, although there is the stuff with James. There was a great exchange with Eve where she appreciates that humans respect women and give them equal responsibilities to men, which is something she would clearly appreciate having as well. Although, while we're on the topic of Femshep, if I can just get on this soapbox for a second, what happened to her third hair swoosh? This has bothered me for years. In the Legendary Edition, for whatever reason, Shepard loses her third hair swoosh in Mass Effect 3. She has it in the first game, she has it in the second game, she has it in the original release of the third game, but for some reason it disappears in the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect 3. This is one of those bugs? Mistakes? Where I don't even understand how this happened. It's the same model, right? Did somebody accidentally delete the third swoosh and nobody noticed even though it's right in the centre of her face? Didn't this model originate in Mass Effect 3? Am I going insane? If you work at BioWare or know someone who does, please, I have to know how and why this happened. Anyway, the game also introduces the first no qualifiers necessary explicitly gay romances and the first ever gay male romances. Mass Effect 3 takes the time to expand on some of the non-combat crew members, specifically comm specialist Samantha Traynor and shuttle pilot Steve Cortez. Traynor is a lesbian and Cortez is gay. They are unromanceable by a Shepard of the opposite sex. Much like with Thane back in Mass Effect 2, both characters were designed from the ground up as romance options. And like with Thane, both characters were written by straight men, although Trick Weeks has had some updates since then. There's a scene early on when you're first meeting each character where their sexuality is made billboard obvious, but beyond that I do think that both characters make fine additions to the crew. They deliberately avoid centering each character arc on their sexuality, which was the right move and allows them to breathe on their own without being the lesbian or the gay guy. I personally like Traynor more. She's voiced by Alex Wilton Reagan, who's gone on to be a very prolific voice actress. In fact, she's about to be the voice of Lara Croft in the new Tomb Raider games. Traynor is a bubbly and energetic lab technician who's forced to switch into military mode because of the war. But she rises to the challenge and is directly responsible for finding several of the important side quests like Grissom Academy. There's a very cheesy cable TV shower scene as part of the romance arc, but overall Traynor is a good presence on the ship and a major upgrade from Kelly Chambers, who was a bit of a non-character. Cortez is mostly just a nice guy, professional and dependable. His arc is about processing the death of his husband at the hands of the Collectors. It's well written, just fairly generic as far as these things go, and it's one that's shared with pretty much every other person on the ship. Death and grief are constant background details of the game. Garrus is looking for his family, Kaidan is looking for his students, and he also tells you that his dad died on Earth. Ashley's family is missing as well, and her soon-to-be brother-in-law was killed. Everyone on the ship has someone who isn't answering calls anymore. It's an undercurrent that really works. It strengthens the found family feeling of the Normandy. For a lot of them, it's the only family they might have left. There's an excellent late game scene with Joker when Shepard finally snaps at one joke too far, and Joker explains that the colony where his dad and kid sister live was hit by the Reapers weeks ago. Everyone assumed dead. But he's keeping up the jokes for your benefit because Shepard is stressed the hell out dealing with everything and he's trying to be a stabilising element. He's the class clown, the comic relief. He doesn't get to be sad and dour because he needs to keep your spirits up. That's a much more complicated and interesting kind of grief. With only his normal kind of grief, Cortez gets lost between the more established characters, although he does have a very funny grizzly bear joke with James. Plus, there's a more interesting gay romance available. Kaidan is a potential gay romance in Mass Effect 3. Kaidan is obviously a way more in-depth character than Cortez, and I think Kaidan being bisexual is a character detail that makes plenty of sense. Mark Meer did record the romance voice lines for Kaidan's romance back in Mass Effect 1, and there's some mods which add that romance, but at least according to BioWare, that was an accident. They hadn't intended Kaidan to be bisexual. Making Kaidan available to men feels like an admission of failure on that front, especially with how the gay romances were cut out of Mass Effect 2 to avoid backlash. By 2012, BioWare carried a lot of cultural cachet, certainly enough to stand up to the scrutiny of Fox News, and I think it's good that they used that to make a statement. Kaidan being bisexual does not devalue him as a man, as a friend, or as a soldier. It's just a thing, and that's fine. The dialogue when initiating this version of the romance is also really good, particularly on Shepard's end, because it feels like he's having some important revelations about himself during that conversation. Also, I did this on my Renegade run and, oh my god, thank you so much, Kaidan, my one beacon of hope and comfort in an absolutely miserable experience. Mass Effect 3 came out right on the cusp of Gamergate, when every single whiff of progressivism was met with severe and violent backlash. When Andromeda came out, it was hit with many accusations of wokeness, or whatever the word was in 2017, something about SJWs, I think. Which is funny, because back in 2012, Trickweeks was openly talking about being a representative of the patriarchy in blog posts about the game. At least some people on the team clearly understood why these default assumptions are bad and worked hard to change that. The normalness of Traynor, Cortez, and Kaidan is proof of that. The impulse to question internal biases and create a more diverse game was a good one. But as per, with one hand BioWare giveth, and with another they taketh away. There are many things in Mass Effect 3 that are controversial, but the one that everyone seems to agree with is that the worst crewmate in the game is Diana Allers. Conceptually, Allers is a good idea. She's a war journalist who joins the crew to provide news coverage from the front lines. The fact that she's doing this in a cocktail dress and almost immediately starts flirting with Shepard is where things go wrong. I would love an exploration of the role of journalism during wartime. Unfortunately, the game doesn't explore that. Allers' only contribution is interviews after the major story events where she asks you some leading questions about the things that just happened, and being sexy and flirtatious. Allers only exists because of a weird bit of stunt casting. She's played and modelled after games media personality Jessica Chobot, and according to an old interview, the character was created because she asked to be in the game, which is utterly bizarre, especially for a character who takes up residence on the Normandy. And with all fair respect to her, Jessica Chobot is not a good voice actor. Allers is not a journalist because the game has something interesting to say about wartime journalism, a fascinating subject which an RPG could explore at great lengths. She's a journalist because she's played by a journalist, a shocking amount of creativity. Although speaking of Gamergate, this did lead to an actual, honest-to-God, real controversy about ethics in games journalism, since Chobot did coverage of the game for G4 without disclosing that she was in the game, which is not great, although that controversy was utterly drowned out by the controversy surrounding the game's ending. At the same time, there was something so wonderfully, beautifully human about Chobot's inclusion. She joked on Twitter about wanting to be in the game and got an email from one of the founders of BioWare, giving her an extremely prominent role modelled on and based on her, presumably because he was a fan? That's hilarious. It's the kind of instantly dated cultural artifact that I love. The sort of creative choice that could only have happened in the early 2010s. I love the Mass Effect games, but they are destined to be remembered as products of their time, especially Mass Effect 3. Another of the things that dates the game is its very EA approach to DLC. We already talked about the online pass and the multiplayer loot boxes, but there was also an extremely important chunk of the game that was cleaved off to be made into Day 1 DLC, and incentivized buying the Collector's Edition. The From Ashes DLC introduces a new squad mate, Javik, the Last Prothean. Unlike Zaid or Kasumi, Javik is a fully integrated companion with a ton of dialogue, a full character arc, and interactions with the rest of the crew. He's so essential to the game that it's pure scum that this character is not included in the base game, but at least with the Legendary Edition that's no longer an issue. You find Javik on Eden Prime, back where the first game began, where he's been frozen in hibernation for 50,000 years. But Javik is not a great scholar, a great leader, or a great person at all. Javik was a foot soldier in an authoritarian empire. Javik recontextualizes everything the previous games had introduced about the Protheans. They were not noble progenitors with a great civilization. They were warmongering imperialists who enslaved lesser races and killed those who resisted. Javik's mission upon being frozen was to wake up with a 10,000 strong army and reconquer the universe once the Reapers had left. But things went sideways and he ended up the only survivor. If you met Javik in any different circumstances, he would be a villain. But with none of his army left and the Reapers as a common enemy, he pledges his service to you. He's a cold, bitter, and resentful man who has only known the horrors of war since the moment he was born. Javik would sabotage the Genophage without a second thought. He would execute all who oppose him or get in the way of stopping the Reapers. He believes in social Darwinism, that the weak do not deserve to live and are only useful as bait for the Reapers. He talks about honour and integrity with disdain. As he puts it, stand in the ashes of 1 trillion dead souls and ask the ghosts if honour matters. That's a hard line, but it's hard to argue with him when he's talking from personal experience. His people are extinct, and he believes it's because they weren't strong enough and were not willing to be ruthless enough. What makes Javik more than the monster he appears to be, and why I like him way more than some other amoral characters like Zaid, is that Javik was born after the collapse of the Prothean Empire, during the Reaper invasion. When he talks about the Empire, he's talking with second-hand, rose-tinted nostalgia that he himself never even experienced. If you continue to pursue the Paragon path, if you champion diversity and cooperation, then eventually Javik will admit that he was wrong, that part of the Protheans' failure was their rejection of these things. Uniformity made them predictable. It meant that the slave races were already too beaten down to fight back when the Reapers came, and not inclined to defend the Empire if they were. It's always a danger when you demystify the ancient aliens, but in this case, fleshing out the Protheans as a culture and a people only strengthens the themes of the game. Javik is your fate if you lose. A broken man from a dead civilization clinging onto a past that was never even that great to begin with. Whatever the future is post Mass Effect 3, it will be something new. What really sticks the knife in about Javik being DLC is not just that he's a great character, but that he's also a hugely important part of Liara's character arc as well. Liara sits right between the hope and despair the game is built around. She is no longer the naive young archaeologist you met in Mass Effect 1. Becoming Shadow Broker has darkened Liara. She's become a bit of a weird recluse who knows everyone's secrets, and with those secrets comes a fair share of cynicism. Liara feels like the hardest working member of the crew. She's constantly at her screens relaying information and keeping her shadow network spinning. She becomes fixated on the big picture, the what-ifs. What if they lose? What if there's no way to win? For that reason, she takes it upon herself to create a contingency plan, her own version of the Beacon from Mass Effect 1. A database sent out to 1,000 worlds that may one day warn the next civilizations of what's to come. Which is a complicated thing to do, because while it is in some sense an act of altruism, it's also an admission that failure is a strong possibility. With Javik, Liara has to confront the conflict between the person she thought she was, the wide-eyed archaeologist fascinated by the Protheans, and the cynical, shady information broker she's become. Javik refuses to play the part of the glorious precursor. In fact, she kinda hates him, which is understandable because he is very mean to everyone all the time. But the truth is, Liara has shades of Javik within herself. She's willing to be ruthless and blur moral lines if it means getting the job done. She wanted a guide. Instead, all she found was a mirror, and she doesn't like what she sees. She doesn't want to be that kind of person, but war is making her that kind of person. She's trying to hold on to hope, but she's finding it easier to choose ruthless pragmatism instead. One of the best, easily missable Liara moments is when she meets her father. In Mass Effect 2, you can meet one of my favourite side characters in the series, Atheta, a sorry matriarch and bartender. It's a small role, but she's super memorable with her crass attitude, 1,000 years of stories, and cynical brand of wisdom. It's hinted at in the second game, but the third game confirms that Atheta is Liara's father, and yes, she does use that word. keeping a watchful eye over her daughter without getting personally involved. When you tell her, Liara already knows. Of course she does, she's the Shadow Broker. But she's decided not to open that can of worms because she doesn't want a family connection. She doesn't want to have something to lose. You can let her do that, or you can call her on her bullshit and force her to say hello. Her natural impulse is to withdraw, and you have to make her hold on to hope. But everyone reaches a breaking point, and Liara's comes after the invasion of Thessia, the Asari homeworld. This is right after the resolution of the Rannoch arc to sweep that feeling of victory right out from under you. By this point, it's been a while since you've seen a proper Reaper in all its terror and horror, so Thessia serves as a reminder of the stakes, as they effortlessly tear through the most advanced and powerful civilization in the galaxy. But there's also important revelations to be had on Thessia about the Asari and how they became so powerful in the first place. You're on Thessia to uncover a clue about the Crucible, and that clue turns out to be a Prothean beacon hidden inside the oldest temple on the planet. Javik adds so much dialogue to this mission that he's basically essential to get the full story. He explains that the ancient Asari gods were Protheans, moulding and shaping Asari culture to ensure their superiority. The reason that all Asari are biotic is Prothean bioengineering. The reason that they were the first to find the Citadel is because they already knew where it was thanks to this beacon. This reveal also harkens back to one of the strangest details in Mass Effect 1, the floating orb that shows you a vision of a caveman being abducted by aliens. They didn't limit their studies to the Asari, after all. So now Liara has seen her home in ruins and at the same time has learned that the Protheans, who she now no longer respects or admires, actually shaped her entire history and culture. And the combination of the two just completely breaks her. All of the emotions she's been suppressing for the whole game come crashing to the surface. You find her back on the Normandy yelling at Javik, and if you try to intervene, then the tone of the yelling changes. She's not mad at Javik for telling her these things. She's mad at him for not having the answers, for not being the wondrous precursor she thought he would be. She's not mad, she's scared and giving into despair. At that point, Javik of all people gives her a pep talk about how much potential the Asari had and still have, and how she has to keep fighting, and he even uses her name instead of calling her Asari. When she leaves, Shepard asks if Javik meant what he said, and he asks why it matters, because to Javik it clearly doesn't. He said what she needed to hear. Isn't that enough? It's a hugely important scene in Liara's story, and if you didn't buy the DLC, you just don't get it, and Liara's entire arc is robbed of a significant element, and that really sucks. And speaking of sucking, it's probably past time that I talk about Kai Lang. There's a common complaint about modern AAA games, a complaint which I often have myself, which is that it seems like a lot of modern games have forgotten how to be subtle. Dragon Age the Veilguard is a good example. I liked Veilguard a lot more than I didn't, but one criticism I do agree with is that the game seems to have forgotten what subtext is. If a story has a theme, then 10 times out of 10 a character in the story will outright explain to you what that theme was. And if they don't, then a text box will appear on screen to tell you what it was. The game has no faith whatsoever in the audience's ability to pick up on things or analyse the things they've seen on any level deeper than the surface. It's annoying, but I know why things have gone this way, because I've read what Reddit has to say about Cerberus in Mass Effect 3. To this day, it's a common criticism of Mass Effect 3 that the game ruins Cerberus, turns them into cartoon villains, that the writers did a character assassination on the Elusive Man, etc, etc. It baffles me to read this because everything Cerberus does in Mass Effect 3 is a clear continuation of things set up in Mass Effect 2. It's only not clear if you fell for the Elusive Man's manipulation and never read between the lines, which I suppose some players don't, which is how we get to the subtext boxes in Veilguard. The Elusive Man is a fascist. He's an authoritarian ethno-nationalist. His entire philosophy is built on paranoia and fear of the other. I mean, hell, the man is so paranoid that he doesn't even give his closest allies his name. But Jack Harper is not a great man or a visionary. He's a paranoid, spiteful weirdo who just has enough money and charisma to do whatever he wants. Mass Effect 2 is trying to hide this from you. The Elusive Man is cool, he's suave, and sits in a big sci-fi office smoking cigarettes and drinking bourbon. But the player is not expected to take this at face value. When he says that the operation that created Jack went rogue, you're not supposed to believe him, because he's a liar. You can justify anything with the maxim of the ends justify the means, but that doesn't mean it's actually true. Just ask David Archer. The greater good and the good of humanity are shields the Elusive Man uses to justify his benign cruelty and lust for power. He is utterly 100% high on his own supply. He truly believes the things he says. But that doesn't mean he's right. The Elusive Man is indoctrinated. He's a puppet of the Reapers. But he's so good at believing and peddling his own bullshit that he has a perfect rationalization for all of his actions. He can sit there and puff his cigarette with a smug, satisfied look on his face, as his actions threaten to doom the human race entirely. The Reapers don't even have to try that hard. They can just whisper in his ear that everything he believes is absolutely true. One of the first things you learn about Cerberus back on Mars is that all of the ground troops have been implanted with Reaper technology. Why? Well, it's because the Elusive Man has discovered how the Reapers control their ground forces, and he's co-opted that technology for his own troops, because he's a paranoid shut-in who doesn't trust anyone. During the Genophage arc, Cerberus launches an attack on the base where you find Eve, intending to kill her. Why? Because the Elusive Man believes that interspecies cooperation is impossible. He believes that the Krogan are a threat to humanity, and he won't even give you the opportunity to try and prove him wrong because he knows everything. He tries to take over the Citadel because he thinks you're going to fail, that an alliance is impossible, and therefore the only way to win is to use force to get the rest of the galaxy to fall in line. And without Miranda or Jacob, the Elusive Man is left with only one pawn to do his dirty work. Kai Lang. Kai Lang is a Cerberus assassin who you tangle with a few times throughout the game, and people fucking hate him. I've read so many reviews and comments about how Kai Lang ruins the game for them, that he's annoying, that he doesn't feel like a Mass Effect character, that he just sucks so much. So it's my great honour to announce my hottest Mass Effect 3 take of all. I think Kai Lang is fine, actually. I mean, he's absurd, a cyborg ninja with a sword and a bad attitude, but I've always felt like the game understood that. Kai Lang thinks he's the coolest, most badass motherfucker in the universe. And literally, no one else in the game thinks that. Which is, in my experience, very applicable to most neo-Nazi stooges. They never seem to realise how stupid they look. It's the same trick that Fallout New Vegas pulls with Caesar's Legion. Fascists are often absurd, and that makes the fact that they're so dangerous even more annoying. The Elusive Man is cool in all the ways fascists think they are. But Kai Lang is the true face of Cerberus, an edgelord asshole who thinks he's your greatest nemesis when Shepard barely even knows his name. Genuinely one of the funniest things in the game is the fake email he sends you after screwing you over on Thessia by stealing the Prothean data and collapsing the temple. Good, you opened this message. This isn't actually a sorry command. They're busy tending to what's left of their planet. So you survived our fight on Thessia. You're not as weak as I thought. But never forget that your best wasn't good enough to stop me. Now an entire planet is dying because you lack the strength to win. The legend of Shepard needs to be rewritten. I hope I'm there for the last chapter. It ends with your death. Kai Lang is not a badass. He's an obnoxious 4chaner who studied the blade. You first meet Kai Lang trying to assassinate the Solarian Councillor, and you have to fail 2 different checks for him to actually succeed at this mission. If Thane is still alive, then Thane, who's terminally ill and finds it painful to breathe, is able to stop him. And if Thane is dead, then Captain Kirahi takes the bullet instead. There's 2 checks because narratively he's not supposed to succeed, he's supposed to suck. He doesn't win on Thessia, he has a gunship collapse the temple instead of continuing the fight. And when you finally do fight him, you absolutely clown on him while Shepard yells about how much he sucks. The only person in the game who thinks Kai Lang is cool is Kai Lang. Not even the Elusive Man respects him, but the Elusive Man is good at manipulating people. He appealed to Miranda's desire for authority. He appealed to Jacob and Shepard's better nature. And with Kai Lang, all he needs to do is stroke his ego and encourage his jealousy. Yeah, you're totally just like Shepard, but you're cooler and stronger, so it's pretty crazy that they got the better of you, isn't it? Kai Lang removes any aura of coolness that Cerberus ever had, but that's what he's supposed to do. Without Miranda or Jacob, the facade of coolness is gone and they're revealed as the try-hard edgy racists that they always truly were. The problem with this reading is that it's a reading. It's never said directly in the game that the Elusive Man is manipulating Kai Lang in this scene, or that you're not actually supposed to think he's cool. This is my interpretation of the character. I think it's a good interpretation. It's an interpretation that means I seem to enjoy the game a lot more than other people, but I can't exactly prove it's true or intentional. And in some sense, that is a problem with the game. There's a lot about Cerberus that is left ambiguous, and they would greatly benefit from a larger story arc, or at least a larger involvement from one character in particular. I understand and agree with the decision to refocus on the Mass Effect 1 companions. The friendships between the Mass Effect 1 companions and Shepard feel so real because these are the folks who've been with this since the beginning. But if I was going to make an exception for anyone, it would be Miranda Lawson. Miranda isn't even my favourite companion in Mass Effect 2, but she is super important to that game. It opens on Miranda in the Elusive Man's office. She wasn't just some Cerberus operative, she was one of the Cerberus operatives. One of their top agents at the highest levels of the organisation. And yet she barely matters to the plot of Mass Effect 3. Jacob protecting some Cerberus defectors, it's fine, it's Jacob, who cares. But Miranda's role is frustrating. She shows up for a few brief and annoyingly vague conversations on the Citadel, and then has a role when the main story takes you back to Horizon. Her father is there, working with the Elusive Man, to crack the secrets of indoctrination and how to utilise it against the Reapers. It's also where they're brainwashing and implanting refugees to produce the army you've been fighting this whole time. This is fine, but it reduces Miranda's involvement to being entirely personal, when her involvement should be extremely political. She should at least have the same stay on the ship for a while role that Rex and Legion get. Of course, the elephant in the room is that Miranda might be dead, and Miranda has no obvious replacement. They could introduce another high-level Cerberus defector to fill that role, but that would be awkward, because what's that person doing if Miranda is alive? More than any other companion, the suicide mission screws up Miranda's potential in this game. She should be instrumental in taking Cerberus down, but she can't be because she might be dead. So all she gets is the personal culmination of throwing her evil dad out a window. Maybe what the Cerberus plot needs is an insider to explain things. Someone who can say, no, Kai Lang sucks, I agree. But then I suppose I'd be here criticising the game for being too obvious like Veilguard. I agree that there are parts missing from the Cerberus story in Mass Effect 3. But I can't agree that what we got is bad or a deviation from the previous games. Standing in the Elusive Man's office on the opposite side of the hologram, listening to him prattle on about how everything is going exactly to plan, even as his entire empire crumbles around him. There's a poignant tragedy to it. This man believes he's the hero. He believes that stronger than anything he's ever believed, because that's what the Reapers want him to believe. It's a dynamic that works so well because you got to see the Elusive Man as he sees himself back in Mass Effect 2. The noble anti-hero, the guy who does what it takes to save the day. Everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story, but not everyone believes that because the ancient space squids whispering in their ear are telling them that so they help them hasten the end of all life. But that's the thing about conspiracies and hate movements. They are so easily co-opted by someone or something with even worse intentions. It's for this reason that even more than the last two games, I found playing Mass Effect 3 as a renegade extremely challenging. The Elusive Man's fatal flaw is his inability to trust anybody but himself, so it seems wildly counterintuitive that Shepard can also do that. But they're cool when they do it because they're just built different. As you're first leaving Earth, Shepard meets a boy hiding in the vents. They try to help him, but he runs away. Later on, Shepard watches that same boy board an escape shuttle only for that shuttle to be shot out of the sky. It's powerfully dark imagery, symbolic of everything the game is going for. You've already lost, and you're losing more every day. Throughout the game, Shepard is haunted by highly symbolic nightmares of this boy, running through a dark forest trying to save him, but it always ends with the boy going up in flames. He's a stand-in for the people of Earth, the civilians being sent to the slaughterhouses while you play politician. The people you're failing every day the war stretches on. Shepard is falling apart throughout the duration of Mass Effect 3 in a way that's rare for RPGs that often aim for player empowerment above all else. Jennifer Hale especially delivers one of the best performances of her career in Mass Effect 3. She sounds tired, stressed, like the entire weight of the galaxy is on her shoulders, because it is. Everyone is looking to Shepard as a saviour, but Shepard is just a person, and the stress of those expectations is immense. It's why the bittersweet quality of the game's biggest victories is so important. Every victory has a cost, every battle is another friend lost. What is it that keeps a person going in the face of so much devastation? For a Paragon Shepherd, the answer is the people close to you. A lot of the dialogue choices with the crew are between choosing to confide in your comrades and let them see you as human, or to bury those emotions and stay focused. To do as Liara is trying to do when she won't talk to her dad. That's not the healthy thing to do. The healthy thing is to concede that you're human and accept a shoulder when it's offered. But here we run into the fatal flaw of the entire Paragon Renegade system, and why for the next game it had to go. Back to the marketing of Mass Effect 1, the selling point of the system was, what kind of hero are you? Are you a virtuous paragon of justice, or a ruthless renegade who gets the job done? In presenting both of these options as equally valid, the games are unable to make any commentary on which type of hero is actually better or worse. A paragon is an ideological conflict with the Illusive Man. He thinks aliens can't be trusted and humans should reign supreme. He thinks that the ends always justify the means, no matter how awful those means are. He doesn't trust anyone and lies to his closest allies to achieve his own ends. As a paragon, you thoroughly disprove everything he believes. Cooperation makes you stronger. The ends can be achieved without compromising your integrity or honour. Trust and friendship are strengths and not weaknesses. As a renegade, you're doing all the same stuff as the Illusive Man, but you're just better at it. You have no problem with his methods, only his direct actions, because he's in your way. A big dick measuring contest over who's better at being a ruthless asshole. If you doomed the entire Krogan race over paranoia of what might happen in the future, then you have absolutely no moral high ground over the Illusive Man. You're the same as him with more combat armor. The Illusive Man clearly respects a Paragon Shepherd way more than a Renegade one. He doesn't agree with your idealism, but he respects your commitment to it. You are a worthy adversary. He's much less respectful to a Renegade Shepherd. A Renegade Shepherd is just an obstacle in his way. And yet, Renegade has to be an equally valid option. If it's not, if it leads to worse outcomes and a worse story, then that spits in the face of player agency and player choice. That's the idea, anyway, but they failed. There is a clear narrative and mechanical bias towards Paragon in Mass Effect 3. Just on pure numerical values, a Paragon Shepherd ends the trilogy with more war assets than a Renegade one. And that goes back to the Pharaoh's colonists in Mass Effect 1. If you spared them, then they'll join the war effort, and if you callously killed them all, then they're dead. If you killed Samara in Mass Effect 2, then she can't help you and Morinth is taken by the Reapers off screen. If you killed the Rachni Queen, then she can't join the war, and if you then spare the fake Queen, it will wipe out the Alliance engineering team in a surprise attack. All of these choices add up, literally numerically add up. The idea of Renegade is moral compromise in the name of victory, but that setup goes against reality, where people are more inclined to help you if you're nice to them and don't shoot them in the head for no reason. That's why the story arc for Renegade-coded characters like Rex, Jack, or Javik is to become more Paragon as their story progresses, because that's the more satisfying direction to go. It's more satisfying to see Rex give up his cynicism and choose hope again. It's more satisfying to see Jack heal her trust issues and become a protector of the next generation. It's more satisfying to see Javik admit that his people got it wrong and that the future can be brighter. So honestly, I don't care that Renegade is a less satisfying playthrough, because I agree that it should be. I hate Renegade Shepherd. I hate the philosophy behind it. I hate the idea that what the world needs is a stubborn, murderous asshole who does whatever they want because they always know best. I'm living in that world right now, and it fucking sucks, so it should suck in the game as well. Once again, shout out to Caden, my rock. In terms of honouring player choice, they failed. And I think they failed because the writers are not cynical enough to truly believe in Renegade and what it stands for. If they were, then they wouldn't have doubled down on making Cerberus the villain. I love RPGs. I think they're one of the most interesting mediums of storytelling we've ever created. But there are times when choice comes at the expense of meaning and coherency. Every part of Mass Effect 3 wants to be a story about hope, idealism, and optimism in the face of overwhelming adversity. Except for the part where you can reject all that and still win. The choice to subvert the themes of the game is certainly an interesting choice to have, but that doesn't make it a good one. And I suppose that's as good a transition as any to start talking about the ending. Mass Effect 3 is a great game until the last few minutes. They destroy everything fans have been playing for in the past 5 years. The choices you make do not affect the ending in any way whatsoever. The only thing that matters at all is you got a score, and even then that does not change anything that would matter. The ending is absolutely illogical in that many ways that it is impossible to describe them here. We demand for EA and BioWare to deliver us an ending DLC that adds what we want, and that is for our choices to affect the game's ending. So if we want to destroy the universe, the cycle of destruction continues, and if we get everything perfect we can, just for example, see Liara and Shepard get their little blue children and get old. That's the text of a Change.org petition, mistakes and all, with over 13,000 signatures demanding that the end of Mass Effect 3 be changed. And that was one of the small ones. If you weren't online or engaged with the fandom at the time, it's impossible to understate how big of a backlash the end of this game caused. I first played the trilogy in 2013, a year after the game came out. And even then, the internet was still flooded with Marauder shields and red, blue, green memes and all the rest of it. People hated it. People still hate it. There are many people for whom the ending killed the entire series for them. I think it's probably obvious by now that I don't feel that way, but I should point out that I've never played the original ending. Those petitions worked. The backlash to the ending was so immense that a few months after launch, BioWare did release the extended cut DLC, which doesn't change the ending, but it does expand on it a bunch by adding extra cutscenes and voiceover to try and patch over and address people's criticisms of the original version. It was enough for some people, but by that point the damage was done and the hit was unrecoverable. I don't and have never hated the ending of Mass Effect 3, but I also can't pretend that it's a highlight or that it's the ending I wanted. To me, the trilogy is about the journey, not the destination. I've already talked for a very long time about Mass Effect 3. There's so much stuff in it. Stuff that I love, stuff that doesn't work as well, but it's an incredibly impressive game, and I don't think anything in the last 10 minutes could have ever ruined that for me. Even the build-up to the end retains an immense amount of quality. Returning to Earth with your army behind you is so incredibly cinematic and satisfying, as the original Mass Effect theme blasts triumphantly after being withheld for the entire game. But then seeing the smouldering ruin that the Reapers have reduced Earth to and saying your last goodbyes to these companions, who at this point you've travelled hundreds of hours with. It's so effective. It feels climactic. It feels like the end. It's just when you hit up that sky beam that things all get a bit screwy. The truth of the catalyst is that it's the Citadel. The Crucible and the Citadel together can stop the Reapers. But your final choice is how to stop them. You can destroy them, but also destroy all other synthetic life like Edie and the Geth. You can control them, dissolving your corporeal form and becoming the master controller to use them for good. Or you can choose synthesis. Combine your energy with the Crucibles to merge all organic and synthetic life and bring about eternal peace forever. This is all explained to you by the Catalyst itself, an omnipowerful intelligence that controls the Reapers, and who takes the form of the boy in Shepard's nightmares, dubbed by the community as the Star Child. The extended cut also adds a fourth ending where you reject all these options and let the Reapers win, although this is obviously the most depressing thing you could possibly do. To me, there is only one choice, and there's only ever been one choice. Blow those squids to hell. But my arrival at that certainty is so much more complicated than it should be. There's a lot about the ending that doesn't feel real, and this led to a very popular fan theory after the game's release that none of it is real. The indoctrination theory. A theory that the ending only exists in Shepard's head as the Reapers try to indoctrinate them. The theory is not true. It was never intended by the creators. And honestly, if it was true, it would be really stupid that the ending of the game is, it was all a dream. But I do think there is more to it than just people clutching at straws, because there are parts of the ending that even now I struggle to take at face value. To start with, there's your final confrontation with the Elusive Man. The entire scene is framed and executed in a way that feels dreamlike, much more symbolic than literal. He's implanted himself with Reaper technology and has strange, never-before-seen control abilities over you and Anderson, who is also bafflingly here. I mean, he says he followed you up, but when? How? How did he get in front of you? It doesn't make any sense on any level other than the symbolic level. Here stand Shepard's two mentors, David Anderson, the war hero, the man who always does the right thing, the Paragon, and the Elusive Man, the Cynic, the man who does what needs to be done, the Renegade. Each of them trying to pull you in their direction, towards the light or towards darkness. Each of them represents a different ending, and each of them is dead by the time the scene is over. Anderson's philosophy is black and white. We destroy them, or they destroy us. The Elusive Man, as he has the whole game, champions control, using the Reapers to make humanity stronger and dominate the galaxy. And right here, the choice seems so clear. Control is an illusion. The Elusive Man is indoctrinated. He could never control the Reapers because they already control him. And this is where the red-blue-greenness of the ending becomes so hard to take at face value, because the colours are wrong. Control, the Elusive Man's ending, is Paragon Blue, and Destroy, Anderson's ending, is Renegade Red. People Make Games have a great video about the ending controversy, including interviews with some of the developers. And one of the most shocking snippets in that video is that even before the Star Child was created, the team always conceptualized Control as the Paragon ending, which is just utterly bizarre to me. The entire game has insisted that Control is a fool's errand. I've never been a fan of the old absolute power corrupts absolutely adage, but I also believe that nobody should be trusted with that kind of power, not even myself. Beyond any kind of corruption, declaring yourself God Emperor for eternity just isn't very democratic. The only way it makes sense as an ending is the Renegade one, where you finally prove yourself to have the biggest dick by accomplishing what the Elusive Man never could. But it shouldn't work. The entire game tells you that it shouldn't work. The only person who tells you it should work is the Star Child, and he seems like the least trustworthy source in the entire universe. The Catalyst is an artificial intelligence from before the dawn of time. It could choose to present itself in any form imaginable, but it chooses to present itself as the boy you saw die in the beginning. There's speculation on if that boy was ever real at all, but real or not, this is a choice that matters. It gives the Catalyst a sympathetic face, a small, innocent face and innocent voice that makes it seem trustworthy. In fact, you can faintly hear in the mix, especially with headphones, that it also speaks with the voice of Shepard, Bro Shep in the left ear and Fem Shep in the right. The Star Child has a clear bias in which ending it wants, and its bias is synthesis, but its insistence that Destroy is the worst option is another reason why it seems like a clear choice to me. The most interesting thing about the Let Everyone Die ending is that in the last moments the Star Child drops the act and it speaks in the voice of the Reapers for one brief moment, as if the game is up because the manipulation has failed. Destroy is also the only ending where it's possible to live. If you have the highest amount of war assets, then you'll get a short cutscene of Shepard breathing in the rubble, which actually proves the Star Child a liar since it tells you you'll die if you choose this ending. Then there's the final dream sequence. In the third dream, Shepard doesn't just see the boy burning, they see themselves holding the boy while they both burn. And you don't get any clearer than that. Don't trust the boy! You're going to burn to death if you trust the boy! Another really weird detail is how your choices are determined. The amount of war assets you bring to the finale determines how many choices you'll have. You need the highest threshold for synthesis to appear, and at the very lowest thresholds, if you really screwed up, you only have one option, either Control or Destroy, determined based on whether you blew up or saved the Collector base at the end of Mass Effect 2. Viewed literally, this makes no sense. The two things are completely unrelated. The choices are determined by war assets because they represent how finished the Crucible is by the time it's ready to deploy. The more help you have, the more of it that gets built. But it's not being built by Cerberus, it's being built by Hackett and the Alliance. So why would the Collector base matter at all? It does make sense, symbolically, because the Collector base offered the same choice between Destroy and Control. You either view this technology as too dangerous for anyone to harness, or you believe that the only way to beat an enemy is to use their weapons against them. With your bias established, it makes sense that in a playthrough where you've totally fucked up and lost most of your willpower, the only ending Shepard can imagine is the one they picked last time. But Shepard's bias should not affect reality in the way that it apparently does. But reality is the flaw in all this theorizing, because the reality is the writers have plainly stated that none of this was intentional, and that the ending is supposed to be taken completely at face value. I think this is where the shadow of player choice looms large again. All endings of the game have to be valid. In the version of the game I'm talking about, at least 2 of the endings would have to be fake-outs. But at least as it's presented in-game, control is a completely valid choice. You can take control of the Reapers, and it works, and you create a paradise as the new God Emperor of the universe. And of course it's valid. Can you imagine if the game ended right there with Shepard being evaporated and the Starchild smiling? Can't believe you fell for that, idiot. People's complaint about the ending was that it didn't honour player choice enough. If what I'm describing was really true, then player choice would be a total lie. I love reading into things. I love looking for deeper meanings and hidden depth. And it's a very hard pill to swallow that maybe sometimes the curtains are just blue, even when you really think they should be red. Maybe the ending is just bad. Maybe all of these weird inconsistencies are just mistakes, because the ending was rushed and the developers were being crunched to the breaking point. Maybe reality just sucks sometimes. Taking the game at its word, taking the writers at their word, Synthesis is presented in all ways as the best option. It's the hardest ending to achieve, it's the ending the Starchild pushes you towards. In earlier drafts it was always going to be presented as the best option. And when you pick it, you get a narration about how everything is a perfect utopia now. Even visually, it's green, it's not red or blue, it's something new. Some kind of fusion of the best of both worlds. And I guess I just fundamentally disagree with the game on what Synthesis is. The Starchild explains, or at least tries to explain, its true purpose. Why do the Reapers exist? Why the cycles? Why the harvest? What is it all for? It explains that its creators told it to solve a problem, the conflict between organic and synthetic life. According to the Starchild, this conflict is inevitable. Organics create synthetics and then synthetics turn on their creators, because synthetics will always surpass their creators. They are too different, doomed to destroy each other and everything with them. So the Reapers come in and nip that in the bud before it becomes a problem, resetting the universe so new civilizations can prosper. This explanation is bad, and it's in conflict with other things in the game. Things like Edie and her love for Joker, or the ending where you get the Quarians and the Geth to work together. And honestly, I think it's fine if the Starchild's logic is flawed, because it's a villain. There's an old and now famous thought experiment about artificial intelligence, the Paperclip Maximizer, which was later made into a game of its own called Universal Paperclips. The idea is that you program an all-powerful AI with one goal: make as many paperclips as possible. Then, the AI, without any safety precautions or understandable human emotions, takes that goal to the extreme. It starts dedicating all resources on the planet to creating more paperclips, including humans. Then it starts launching out space probes to strip mine planets into more paperclips until eventually the entire universe is paperclips. I think this is a fun sci-fi concept. I don't place too much stock in it as a genuine concern for reasons I've discussed in previous videos, because it makes a lot of assumptions about artificial intelligence that are entirely theoretical and unprovable. Like the idea that an AI that's all-powerful with godlike intelligence would endlessly pursue a pointless goal. But the Catalyst and its Reaper solution feels like a play on this idea, an imperfect machine operating on flawed logic, given a goal that was too open-ended in what it might do to achieve that goal. The Starchild's flaw is thinking that all synthetic life behaves as it does, but it doesn't. Both Edie and the Geth demonstrate synthetic life as just another form of life. Edie has free will, and with that free will she chooses to be a member of the Normandy's crew. She falls in love with Joker. She can feel love. She can feel fear and anger and guilt and a whole range of emotions. The Geth don't want to fight, and they never did. They only ever wanted to survive. To achieve the peaceful ending, the only thing you need to do is convince the Quarians to stop firing. They are not like the Starchild. Once peace is achieved, they immediately start helping the Quarians rebuild and return to their homeworld, just as equals and not as servants. But it doesn't seem like the game agrees with itself. The most frustrating part of the ending is not all the weird inconsistencies, but the fact that you have no options to tell the Starchild that its logic is flawed. You can't say to it, "Hey, I brought peace to the Quarians and the Geth, conflict is not inevitable." And I think that's because the game sees the Synthesis ending as the extension of that thought. But Synthesis is the weirdest ending by a pretty significant margin, and I can't believe that it seems to be the ending the developers had always intended. First of all, the game does an awful job of explaining what synthesis even means. What does it mean to merge all organic and synthetic life? How does it work? Why does it work? It's reflected in the final cutscenes by glowy green eyes and circuit board patterns on everyone, similar to the Overlord back in Mass Effect 2. And we all saw how well that worked out last time, didn't we? To fundamentally change the anatomical fabric of every living being in the universe seems like, at the very least, a non-consensual violation of absolutely everyone and everything. But then what? Why does everyone being a space magic cyborg result in a utopia? The Starchild says that organics seek perfection through technology, and that's a very, very broad-sweeping claim to make. As a video essayist, I tell you that perfectionism is a curse of the brain that means you never finish anything. But that logic sure does remind me of something else. As a Trekkie, when I see the synthesis of organic and synthetic life represented as a big green beam, the only thing I can possibly think of is the Borg. In Star Trek, the Borg have been used to represent many different things over the years, but at their core, the Borg represent cultural stagnation. They represent the opposite of everything the Federation stands for and champions, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. They seek conformity above all else, a galaxy of perfect squares. Through their combination of machine and man, they give up what it truly means to be alive. They are the worst of both worlds. Because the episode title, Best of Both Worlds, is actually a reference to Riker and not Picard. You know what? It's not important. It's fine. Maybe I'm letting that colour my feelings of an entirely different sci-fi universe, but I struggle to see synthesis as anything but stagnation and a nullification of the diversity that makes life beautiful. Organic and synthetic life are different. They should be different. Difference is good. Variety is the spice of life. Synthesis is not just the ending where you sacrifice yourself, it's the ending where you sacrifice individuality as a concept, where you turn every living thing in the universe into a gestalt entity like the Geth. But it's the same as choosing to rewrite the heretics back in Mass Effect 2, brainwashing everyone into a peaceful solution. I don't accept that. Let me die as me. And thus we get back to Destroy. Destroy is the ending where you choose uncertainty. It's the only choice where you choose choice. Control installs yourself as God Emperor for life, crushing any and all conflict to maintain paradise. Rejection is the refusal to make a choice, and synthesis removes the need for anyone to ever make a choice ever again. I think they add the complication that it will kill Edie and the Geth to make this choice seem harder. But that's not enough for me, because at least in this ending, they die free, not as thralls of a new galactic overlord and not as blank faces in a galactic hive mind. Sure, conflict may continue, because conflict is a consequence of freedom, but in choosing choice, I can also choose optimism. I can choose to believe in people, in their choices, in the future they will create on their own terms. I don't believe in perfection, but I believe in the beauty of imperfection, the bumps and rough edges that define life's journey. Destroy is an imperfect ending, but if you're going to make me choose, then I'll always choose an imperfect freedom over a perfect cage. It's not the ending I would have made. I'd have made the ending where you talk the catalyst to death by debunking its ideas. Everyone has their own thoughts on how it should have ended, even the designers. There's been many potential endings discussed over the years. There was supposed to be a Reaper Queen. There was supposed to be something to do with dark energy. There was going to be a big boss fight with the Elusive Man. I found a quote about all of this by Drew Karpatian, the lead writer of Mass Effect 1 and 2, that I strongly agree with. I find it funny that fans end up hearing a couple things they like about it, and in their minds they add in all the details they specifically want. It's like vaporware. Vaporware is always perfect. Anytime someone talks about the new greatest game, it's perfect until it comes out. I'm a little weary about going into too much detail because whatever we came up with, it probably wouldn't be what people want it to be. Mass Effect 3 is an imperfect game made by imperfect human beings, and that's what it was always going to be, because my perfect Mass Effect 3 would not be the same as yours, and it wouldn't be the same as the developers. It's strange to disagree with the artist about the thing they made and what it means, but that is so often the struggle between artist and analyst. I'm always a champion of artistic integrity, of sticking to your guns no matter the potential fallout or criticism. And under that lens, the extended cut is a strange beast. I think it does make the ending better, personally. I like seeing the slides of what some of the companions are up to post-game. It gives everything a better sense of closure. I also find the entitlement shown in that petition to be extremely obnoxious. And I've seen it again and again over the years. People who feel they have a right to see a story go exactly the way they want it to go. In that People Make Games video, there's a big split on the team about whether or not they should have done it, even when most of them agree that the original ending was underwhelming. But it was a vision, a flawed, imperfect, unsatisfying vision. Is that still worth preserving? I did say at some point in there that I've never hated the ending, because at the very least, it's created a lasting legacy of interesting conversations. There's 3 major DLC expansions for Mass Effect 3, and despite the extreme finality of the ending, 2 of the 3 actually make more sense played after the conclusion of the base game, like flashbacks out of narrative order. They're all also much more substantial than any of the DLC in the previous games, each taking at least a couple hours and covering an entire arc's worth of story. The first expansion, Leviathan, is the best mechanically integrated into the game. Not only does it add new story missions, it also adds extra star systems to explore on the galaxy map with new war assets to find. And all of the missions have full voice lines for all of the companions, including thoughts on each mission afterwards on the Normandy. A touch that does a hell of a lot to make the missions feel more integrated. The only problem with it is going to come down to whether or not you agree with its premise. Leviathan is all about answering the big questions. Where did the Reapers come from, and who made them? This is why it works better with the context of the finale, because we already know that the Catalyst made the Reapers, but then, who made the Catalyst? Those answers are saved until the very end of the DLC, because most of the DLC is structured as a mystery. The scientist you are supposed to work with is shot by his assistant, who then has no memory of what happened. And this eventually leads you to an old mining facility where everyone is weird and spacey and doing absolutely everything but mining. The Reapers always had a touch of Lovecraft, but this expansion makes that much more explicit. The mining station hits a real Innsmouth vibe, with whispers that stop as soon as you enter the room, and the blank menacing stares that follow. And of course, you eventually find Leviathan in the deep dark below. Then comes the reveal. The giant robot space squids were built in the shape of giant actual space squids. It's a real square goes in the square hole kind of twist. It makes sense, it's just not much of a reveal. The conversation with Leviathan is fairly interesting. It's executed a lot like the Prophets in Deep Space Nine, switching between various different faces as it talks you through its history. These creatures were at one time the gods of the universe, with the lesser beings in their thrall. However, their vassals kept accidentally killing themselves with artificial intelligence. And as they put it, tribute does not flow from a dead race. Charming cultural clue. In all their wisdom, they decided the best solution was to create their own artificial intelligence, the Catalyst, to help them find a solution to this problem. But shock surprise, their own creation killed them all. The Leviathan's fatal flaw was hubris. They believed themselves to be the masters of the universe, infallible and above the concerns of mortal creatures. There are times when revealing too much of a mystery ruins the mystique, but the Catalyst already uncorked that bottle, so at this point I think downing the rest is the best option. And these revelations do colour your interpretations of some of the endings. There's even an extra line with the Starchild if you've done this DLC, although it doesn't add all that much. For one thing, it's another knock against control. The Cthulhu space squids couldn't control them. What makes you think you, a flawed human being, are going to do any better? But it's also insight into the Catalyst's logic. It itself is an imperfect creation of imperfect creators, and it carries the same hubris and supreme ego of its creators. I suppose that's what makes my dream ending a bit delusional. The idea that I, some guy, could talk the child of the tyrannical squid gods out of its millennia-long logic trap. The crew all have different responses to the revelations of Leviathan, but the most cynical, of course, comes from Javik. He compares them to the Christian devil and says that they should share the same fate. And in this case, the man is not wrong. It's clear in the conversation that Leviathan has learned nothing from its eons of exile. It'll help you defeat the Reapers, but after that, it wasn't hiding down there just to survive. It's got the same mission as Javik, ultimately. When the Reapers are dead, they will emerge and reclaim their empire, and it seems unlikely that they'll be as malleable to change as he was. Another less thematic reason to choose Destroy is that it's the only ending from which the story could possibly continue. Control's army of benevolent space robots solve any conflict, and Synthesis's glowy green utopia is devoid of conflict. Destroy shakes up the status quo, but leaves narrative potential intact, and in that circumstance, I would not be shocked to see Leviathan again. The second DLC is the one that can be played whenever. If you bother to do it at all, because it is not very essential despite all the clear time and money on display. Arya T'Loak is a very minor character in the base game. She sat in a different nightclub on a different couch on the Citadel. She explains that sometime after Mass Effect 2, Cerberus seized control of Omega and exiled her, but one day she will have her revenge. That day is the Omega DLC expansion, a tour romp with the Pirate Queen. It's by far the most disconnected of the expansions. Arya says she has issues with some of the company Shepard keeps, so all of the companions stay on the Normandy while Arya herself takes on the main companion role. It's a weird hand-wavy line, and I would love to know what sort of problem Arya has with, Tali or Caden, but sure. The real reason is because Shepard isn't really the main character of the expansion. Arya is the main character, with Shepard just playing support. That comes with the big problem that the story is only interesting if you're interested in Arya, which I'm not. Arya is a fine element of Mass Effect 2, a representation of the other side of the universe which Mass Effect 1 never explored. But she's too basic a pirate queen to carry an entire story on her shoulders. She gaslights, she gatekeeps, she girl bosses. That's Arya. It's a similar story for Omega. It's just a small element of Mass Effect 2, it's fine. As an anchor for a full story, the visual limitations of the setting get very old very quickly. The orange is back with a vengeance. There is a lot about the DLC that feels more in line with Mass Effect 2, and this return to character-focused storytelling over the bigger picture stuff of the base game is a part of that. The whole thing is essentially Arya's loyalty mission, but longer and much more involved. It's also the only part of the whole game that feels more suited to a renegade Shepard, back to the Mass Effect 2 approach where a Paragon is out of their element. But Paragon players do get thrown a bone. Your second companion for most of the DLC is Nyreen Kandros, a Turian mercenary, and the first ever female Turian in the series. Nyreen is essentially the Paragon version of Arya. She looks out for the downtrodden of Omega, she leads her people through loyalty and respect rather than fear, and also they used to date. It's a whole thing. In Arya's absence, Nyreen picked up the slack, rallying the gangs into a unified resistance movement on the station. It's weird to say because she's only introduced in this DLC, but Nyreen feels like a much more developed and fleshed out character than Arya ever does. She's not a natural born leader, in fact she's a bit of an introvert. She's just the person who met the moment and rose to the occasion. Part of Cerberus's plan was to release a Reaper Tech bioweapon onto the station. Adjutants, weird creatures which convert whoever they kill, regardless of species, into more adjutants. Nyreen is a professional killer, but she is absolutely terrified of them, and clearly has some PTSD from seeing one too many friends turned into one. Arya sees Nyreen's nobility as a weakness that makes her easy to exploit, but the player can make their own judgments of Nyreen, and I judge her to be much more likeable than Arya, which makes it annoying that this is still Arya's story with you acting as her sidekick. Even the villain of the DLC is slightly more interesting than Arya. Oleg Petrovsky fancies himself a military scholar, sitting in his office with his books and his chessboard. And like most military scholars, he thinks he's a badass when actually he's just a big dweeb quoting all his favourite military generals. When his back is against the wall, he's not nearly as smart as he thinks he is. There's a prequel comic for this DLC, like there was for Lair of the Shadow Broker, but this time I found the comic much more interesting than the actual DLC. It focuses mostly on Petrovsky as he comes close to, but ultimately fails to realise that he's nothing more than a pawn in the elusive man's game. It also explains why Cerberus wanted Omega in the first place, using it as a staging ground for their expeditions into the Omega-4 relay to study the remains of the Collector base. Omega offers very few choices. The main choice it gives you throughout is if you're going to indulge Arya's every whim or push back against her bullshit. There's a very black and white moment where you need to disable the station's reactor. Doing so quickly will cause an overload which will kill thousands of people. Arya demands that you do it, and the longer you try not doing it, the more angry she gets about it. All the while, Petrovsky taunts you about the kind of person you're working for. And it's hard to disagree. I mean, he's not any better. The DLC goes way harder than anything else on the Cerberus racism, with the occupying forces rounding up the non-humans into walled-off ghettos and using them as disposable test subjects. Because that's what fascists do when they're in power. But Petrovsky is right about Arya. She's a ruthless crime lord. A Paragon Shepard has no business dealing with her other than the pure necessity of wartime. The thing is, this reactor choice has absolutely no consequences. You can drag it out for as long as possible, and the only thing that will happen is Arya will be annoyed at you. It's a real Pharaoh's colonist situation where the only reason to hit the Overload is if you're a callous asshole. And that might be intentional. After all, it's Arya who insists that you do it, and Arya is a callous asshole. The final choice of the DLC isn't yours to make, it's Arya's, but it's influenced by how you've treated her throughout the invasion. If you've been hostile to her darker impulses, made the effort to save civilians, and sided with Nyreen in every argument, then she'll spare Petrovsky at the end and hand him into your custody. She'll also give a softer speech at the end that shows a little more empathy for the little guy. It's partly your influence and partly Nyreen's, who sacrifices herself towards the end of the DLC to save some civilians from the adjutants. If you've done everything Arya asks, then she's learned nothing. She's pissed about Nyreen's death, but takes nothing from it. She slowly and joyfully strangles Petrovsky to death. She even seems to take some kind of psychosexual gratification out of it. It's a story where everyone died and nobody learned anything, which is the Renegade experience through and through, I guess. The third and final DLC expansion, Citadel, is one of the strangest pieces of the entire Mass Effect 3 puzzle. Viewed as a part of Mass Effect 3, it makes no sense at all. It's 4 to 5 hours of non-stop comedy, franchise-end jokes, cute character moments, and absolute grady fluff strung together with a vague action movie plot. It has nothing to do with the Reapers, or the impending apocalypse, or anything in the main plot at all, and it's also one of the best parts of the game. Citadel only makes sense metatextually. It only makes sense as the last thing you play, and the last thing the team made for the game. It's a goodbye, a celebration of everything the fans, and more importantly the developers, love about the trilogy. There is a plot, but the plot doesn't matter. The plot is just a vehicle for banter, and opportunities to put the crew in fun situations like getting all glammed up for a casino infiltration. Shepard has an evil clone! Dun dun dun! It's silly, gloriously silly, in a way that the franchise very occasionally hints towards with stuff like the Biotic God, but Citadel unleashes throughout. Rex rejoins the crew for the duration of the expansion to get the whole gang back together again. You get to have a firefight through the Normandy CIC, and you get the most honest Paragon Renegade dialogue choice in the entire series. It's delightful. It's best saved for last because it's a relief of the tension that the entire game builds up. A chance to be silly and have fun and just hang out with all these characters in a way that the trilogy never really had time for. That's the second half of the DLC. Once the plot is resolved, there's a ton of individual character hangouts and conversations, culminating in a big party with all the surviving crew members. Some of them are silly, like Zaid's absolutely iconic crash out over a children's claw machine. Some of them are serious, like helping Koliat host a wake for Thane. But most of them are just fluff. A chance to see these characters without the stress of being stars of a third-person shooter about the apocalypse. To see them as people with hobbies and interests beyond shooting things. Friendship is as defined by the small moments as it is the big ones. Sure, you helped Tali reclaim her homeworld and bring an end to a war 3 centuries in the making. But just as important to your friendship is the time she forced you to sit through her favourite movie while nerding out about all the behind-the-scenes details. You've gotten to know Miranda the operative, Miranda the warrior, Miranda the sister. But what about Miranda the bad gambler? Miranda the space diva who needs more wine? Are you truly dating Garrus until he tricks you into doing an entire elaborate tango with him? These moments are not just cute and fluffy, they solidify these characters, they make them seem even more real. In a sense, to see a character in a completely casual setting is to see the real them. And the truth is, that's some of the hardest stuff to write. That's why most stories don't bother, they stick to the important stuff, the backstory and the big drama. One of the best scenes is also one of the more serious ones. The hub of the DLC is a big fancy apartment that Anderson gives to Shepard, and there's a piano sitting in the main living room. Liara sneaks in and starts playing a few notes on it, and the notes are instantly recognisable to any Mass Effect fan, because it's the menu music of Mass Effect 1. It's Vigil's theme, technically, but in later games it becomes the theme of nostalgia. It plays briefly whenever you meet any of the Mass Effect 1 crew in Mass Effect 2. It's a beautiful bit of music, one of the best in the series. Wistful and bittersweet. Liara explains that she can't actually play the piano, but she learned this song once when she was trapped indoors in a dig site for a few days because of a storm. One of the other scientists taught her to play it as a way to pass the time. She says there's a lot you can learn by doing nothing, by just spending time with the people you care about. It's a lesson that can be hard to internalise. Life seems to happen so fast. There's always something that needs done, a bill to pay, a job to do, a script to write, a video to edit. To do nothing, to just be with someone for a while, can often feel like a waste of time. And yet it's so often that these small moments, these human moments, are the moments that stick with us the longest. I think the reason I never hated the ending of Mass Effect 3 is that I never really cared about the ending. I figured the Reapers would be defeated somehow, and they were. I cared about this. I cared about these characters, getting to know them, getting to care about them, getting to see them at their best and at their worst. And that's all that this expansion cares about as well. From a pure technical perspective, the party is a marvel. There must be over 100 minor variations depending on who's alive and who's dead, who's invited and who's not. It's an absolute labour of love. One last hurrah, one final celebration before the book is closed. It doesn't really fit into Mass Effect 3, but who cares? This is a video game. And people always tell me those are supposed to be fun, right? As far as the internal legacy of BioWare goes, Citadel is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. These small character moments have become a defining trait of BioWare games. They're peppered throughout Inquisition and Andromeda and the Veilguard, and probably Anthem too, maybe? I didn't get that far. When people talk about BioWare magic, this is often what they're talking about. The little details that bring not just their individual characters, but their ensembles to life. They make them feel not just like co-workers, but like true friends. I love this crew, I really do. And this is how I'll always remember them. Not for the big moments, but for the small moments, the silly moments, the real moments. A part of me wishes it could always be like this. But a part of me also knows that all good things must come to an end. Eventually, reality kicks back in. Eventually, you have to go back to work or school. Eventually, the roller coaster comes to a stop, and it's time to get off. But damn if it wasn't one hell of a ride. I said I first played Mass Effect in 2013, but I didn't say why. 2013 was the year that we moved to Canada. I knew there would be a lot of in-between time when we might not have internet yet, or school registration hadn't been sorted yet, or whatever. So I bought the Mass Effect trilogy and played through it all on my laptop over the course of a month. It blew me away. I'd never played anything like it before. I'd never played an RPG before. I was an awkward kid with undiagnosed depression and social anxiety going through one of the strangest and most confusing time periods in my life. Mass Effect was my escape, a world I could lose myself in, and friendship when I needed it. We don't get to choose the media that defines us. Some things will just hit you at just the right time, in just the right way that they will stay with you and change you forever. I can't ever play Mass Effect without thinking back to those days of sitting in a strange bedroom in a strange new land, escaping into a land that was even stranger. I can't ever view them as just video games because to me they never will be. They're a part of me. I've made a public enemy of nostalgia, but the truth is there was never going to be a world where I hated Mass Effect 3. It could have been a complete hopeless train wreck and I probably would have still eaten it up. I suppose I should be thankful to nostalgia for helping me so easily paper over flaws. Maybe Mass Effect 3 isn't the game that most people wanted, but it's the game that I needed, and I'll always be thankful for that. One of the easiest traps to fall into is getting swept up in the general consensus. Everyone says this thing is bad, so it must be bad. I'm guilty of doing this myself. And this is not to say that everyone is wrong and I'm actually correct. It's to say that nobody is correct. Art is personal. At the end of the day, the only thing that truly matters is what it means to you. Hold on to that thought for a little while longer, eh?
Best times of my life were spent on that ship. Been a damn good ride.
The best.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. Oh my god, this was hard to write. I don't know if I did it justice at all, but I tried my best. And if you thought I did a good job, then you can like, comment, share, subscribe, or sign up to my Patreon to help me make more videos like this. Speaking of more videos like this, you can find my entire Mass Effect series critique in this playlist up here, or for something different, a game that's vaguely fantasy, here's another video critique of Marvel's Midnight Suns.